What up, what up, what up? Let me get everybody in the room, how everybody doing this morning. Get to this morning convo, Grand Rising. To all my kings and queens, what up? What up, what up, what up? How y'all this morning, man? We gonna get to it on this morning convo. Let me finish tagging a few people in. We'll get straight to it. This morning, we're going to start the morning convo. We're going to talk about Guru, who I brought y'all yesterday. He's going to talk some more about engineering and creativity for those who are into the arts. We're going to talk about I found another documentary on accident yesterday on Hannibal. Like, you remember I played one a couple weeks ago, but I found another documentary on Hannibal Bay, the more that conquered Rome. So it's a different documentary. I also, it's a court case right now about these three friends that went fishing, and then they found them shot up. You know what I mean? So we're going to talk about all of this. But to start off the morning convo, to get everybody, get the blood flowing, we're going to holler at Guru, and we'll build. And as the conversation go on, we'll get serious and get in the law at the end. Holla at me.
But everybody in hip-hop, basically. If you search for everybody in modern hip-hop, you've worked on their records, pretty much.
Pretty much. I don't feel bad about that.
No, I guess not.
I meant the other part, that everybody always focuses on Jay-Z, which he's my brother and my boss, and I love him to death, but I have worked with a lot of other people. But what made me feel good about that was at an award show, Bruce Swedien was there, and everyone was focusing on these two Michael Jackson albums, which is like, okay, you're not going to find better than those two, but it's like, this is Bruce Swedien. He's worked on everything, you know, like not just these two Michael Jackson albums, but I get it. It's Michael Jackson. So I kind of take it in that same vein that people forget about all the other stuff because it's Jay-Z and Kanye and Beyonce, so.
It's tough to be compared to Bruce Swedien and Michael Jackson. I guess that's too bad. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, you've basically crafted a lot of the sound of modern hip-hop, and I think you're known for approaching engineering with kind of a producer's mentality.
Yeah.
And that's a lot about what we'll talk about tonight.
Cool.
I think also important is in the past few years, you've been working a lot in education as well, and maybe start telling me a little bit about that and what you're doing there.
Well, my mother and most of the women in my family are educators. And it was something where I was trapped in the studio in a good way, you know, not in a negative way, for so long that there wasn't that connection with people. And then what happened was MP3s sort of hit and destroyed the studio business in New York City. So the place where you would go to learn, you know, how to be an engineer in a practical sense, not just book knowledge, but actual working knowledge of dealing with people and how to run a session and how to learn all that stuff isn't really there anymore. So I feel like people that love what we do as engineers and want to teach that, you know, that thing started to get into me. And then going out and talking, I found it really educational for myself, and it was pleasurable to teach. And I caught the teacher bug. And I love teaching. I love that having students that don't understand the concept and you're trying to figure out how to explain it to them, and you see that moment where the spark goes off in their eyes. It gives a spark to me, not only because they're getting the information, but I figured out how to give them the information.
Ms. Carter,
because everyone learns in a different manner. So not only is it having to know your information backwards and forwards, but it's like, how do you teach this kid? Is this kid more visual? Does he need to see you draw the concept? Is this kid an auditory kid where he needs, no matter how many times you draw it and say it, he needs to hear it, you know, to understand what a compressor is doing? Getting the concept across is an art form in and of itself, and I found that to be a really pleasurable thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, in your words, what's your key role as an engineer?
My key role as an engineer is to deliver a finished record. And that may sound like this broad thing, but that encompasses so much more. And I sort of take on a little bit of this A&R role because of what I meant to the entire Rockefeller Records. So it wasn't this thing where I would go in for a session for 8 hours a day and then leave and then not deal with that artist. We didn't run Baseline Studios like a normal studio. There was no booking of studio time. We locked it out for years in advance. So the artist had free reign to come into the studio whenever they wanted to. So innately, you become intertwined with people's lives, their career, where they're going, and they sort of trust you to guide their career musically. And we had this great balance of people that worked in the office and they love doing office stuff. I'm not one of those people. I don't like cubicles. I don't like the office. I hate meetings about the meeting, You know, like, that's stupid to me.
We have some of those too.
Yeah. So I like to actually craft music. I didn't understand how people could A&R from an office. You know, I have to A&R from the studio and be able to direct records and direct people's thought process while they're creating records. So that was part of my job as well, was to sort of control the studio environment and control this chaos of all these different artists coming in and figuring out not only how to divide up the time, but how to be effective with their careers, because they were all in different points in their career. And I guess that's part of my job as well, besides just the normal sonics of the record and deciding what equipment we're going to use and that type of stuff. It's very much the psychology of engineering that was a part of my job as well. Yeah.
And so are you ever alone in the studio, or is it always a social thing with the other people that are in there?
I'm alone during mixes a lot, which I like to be alone for maybe 3 or 4 hours while I'm mixing, and then have the artist come in, or whatever their, you know, plethora of people that they bring. Rap guys like to bring a lot of people to the studio. But over the years, I've developed sort of a relationship with everyone, so they know to sort of leave me alone, or if you're going to be in the room, just be quiet, you know, while I'm trying to do certain things, or don't ask a lot of questions until I tell you that the meal is cooked and it's ready, and then you can comment on it.
See, because when you're dealing with Guru, the biggest part of this conversation that this morning, Guru was just talking about the role of the engineer. I always express to people how important the job of the engineer is when it comes down to getting the music out and getting your music heard. Or, you know, the word engineer, in any profession, when you use the word engineer, they have a very important job. And he's also breaking down that the engineer also is like psychologically responsible for the people in the studio to be able to help them get to where they go. Because let's say it's 10 artists, they all in different places. Not everybody in this comfortable place of writing. Some people still struggling. Some people not comfortable with doing certain things. So he was saying that him being an engineer, he's more like an A&R, and he can understand why the A&Rs who could sit in the office could make all these choices when they wasn't on ground zero, you know?
Just simply because of my way of working. You know, I do a lot of subtractive EQing, which you'll hear me fishing around for a certain frequency with it turned way up with the, you know, it's on like +10, and then I'm sweeping frequencies and then I'll turn it down. So you'll hear me sort of take frequencies out of a bass, and then someone who doesn't know is like, well, why are you taking bass frequencies? I'm like, because I'm making room for the kick, and if you don't shut up, I can't figure out where this is going to go, you know? So I just like quiet during that time. But then I do like the environment of people when we're finalizing things, because I like to vibe off of people, you know, especially during production. But during mixing, you have to kind of be quiet. Yeah.
And I guess that's a big part of your role as an engineer is to.
And that's a very big problem today in music. Is that as you hear this Guru who produced for Jay-Z and all of them, he's like #1 engineer in the world. Guru was saying that when he's mixing, like, you know, a lot of times you be in a studio with artists, and artists don't realize when they recording today, artists trying to get their albums mixed and mastered at the same time they trying to record, or trying to get all at once, and it causes a problem because it frustrates the engineer from being able to do the job. When in reality, the artists don't know that. Really, they just focus on one thing. Good morning. The artist is focused on, the engineer is saying, like Guru's saying, like, yo, when I'm mixing, I kind of need you to shut up. I can't be, I'm trying to focus, and the point of it is not being mean, saying like, look, I know what you want to do, but I know what I gotta do in order to get this to resonate the right way. And you might not be conscious of it because you just listening and you just in your art mode, you know what I mean? So it's just showing you how important it is that, like, you know, when I record, like, I'll do certain things with them, but through time I learned to do most of my mixing later when they're gone. Like, you come here, you gonna pay for your sessions, you come, you drop your songs, You know what I'm saying? I give you a decent mix, you leave, but I do all the other work in the dark. Now, when I'm done, I send it to you and give me your critiques. But while we in the studio working, you trying to get me to mix, and you ain't an engineer, and you don't know how to mix and master, and you don't understand, you wasting time asking me questions, not because they're dumb. Now, if you getting an engineering, it's cool, but if you saying like, oh, bro, change this, then like I tell a lot of people, I tell you the truth, and then if you still want me to go forward and keep changing the record while I'm in the studio engineering, I tell you like, all right, I'll change it. But when you go home and people tell you it's wrong, remember I told you that this was gonna da-da-da, and sometimes people go home and they come back like, bro, you right. You know what I'm saying? But that's the way you gain trust, but at the same time you tell a person like, yo, it's your time. So if you want it this way, I'm telling you that it ain't gonna sonically be right. You know what I mean? That's the key as engineering. So you gotta understand that these engineers, the ones who speak up are gonna always say like, yo, I need time. I need you to kind of be quiet. I need you to let me do my job and don't be all over my back.
See how people are going to vibe the music that you're making.
That's the whole point of music. It's the whole point is to transfer some vibration, some feeling. And I never lose sight of that. My teachers, my instructors were just so good at transferring that idea to me, that this is a technical thing that the people that you're servicing don't understand. So don't fall too far into the technical aspect for the sake of the record, you know? And then sometimes I hear people battling or trying to show off. You know, we have this whole plethora of plugins. So there's a couple records that I've worked on or that I've heard people work on where like the engineer is doing all this complicated stuff and only other engineers will know what he's doing. And then the producer's doing all this complicated stuff and the artist is, and it sounds like a mess, you know, versus there's a key to locking in to a groove and to a rhythm, or realizing that some of my favorite records were done by like 3 or 4 instruments or 3 or 4 people, you know? If you listen to Nirvana records, you know, it's 3 people. If you listen to The Meters, it's 4 people. If you know, I could go down the line of these small groups that have this huge sound, but it's about the groove that they create. And I never lose sight of that as someone who's presenting records, because we tend to want to show off and show people that we know all this information. It's sort of like when, I don't know how old everyone is, but it's like when word processors first came out and people were typing their college papers and it had all these different fonts and all this different, it was just like, it looks a mess just because you had the ability to do it. So it's like, calm down, you know, maybe use that little thing one time in there and then figure out how to present the paper in the proper way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what you said earlier actually about...
So Guru said people be overcomplicating. So some people I have, for example, excuse me, some people come to me and be like, yo, they hit me on the phone and they be like, yo, can you master my project for me? And I always tell people like, yo, I always tell people the truth. They call me, I say, listen, I'm not gonna take your money because I don't know what the engineer that you work with or whoever you dealing with, I don't know what they did. But the most important thing is the foundation of your record, meaning, you know, you can send your record anywhere, but the foundation, how you brought the sound in, how it's set up is the most important. Now, if I control the whole session from the beginning, then I can guarantee you certain qualities of sound. But I can't guarantee you complete quality of sound depending on where it came from. I don't know what they're using, the controllers, the midis, you know, the mics, I don't know. But when I get I've seen certain sessions that I've gotten that be overly complicated. And this is what's happening. Your man's go get some plugins and shit, and your homegirl that's in this, she'll get some plugins, and they using all of this high-powered plugins with no knowledge of how to use them, or no knowledge of what they really do. Even people, especially people who go to school for it, they have no knowledge, because in school the only thing they teach you is how to navigate the program, but you can't teach somebody how to use something. So the problem is it's a mess. He said you got the beat maker, the producer, he got all these plugins on his beat. He got all these special effects on his beat that make his beat sound too loud, limiters and all this shit on his beat. But when the rapper is going to affect the rapper when he goes to rap on it. Then the rapper go up there and he doing all this extrally complex shit that don't make no sense. You know what I'm saying? And then the engineer, you know what I'm saying? Then you got the engineer, which sometimes the producer and engineer could be the same, but the producer could make the beat and the engineer clear the record. This could be most of the time 2 different people to make it sound good. And then then that record come to me and it's kind of like, yo, it's just too much. The key is you're supposed to find your style and you want to keep it, you want to get natural sound, like he said. The key is to keep the feel in the natural groove. You know, I was taught by Major, who got a lot of similar concepts as Guru, which is my job is to make you sound as real as possible. So when people hear you live, they be like, damn, that really do sound like him or her. At the same time, give you the dynamic and the thing. But a lot of times people just throw all these plugins up there and all of this, and sound plus sound equal noise. Always remember that.
Subtractive EQing, it's something you hear from Bruce Sweetie and also, I guess, too. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit on how you would use that in a session?
Well, there's only but so much space, right? There's only but so much space, and I'm talking in terms of headroom, and especially in digital, this is super important. In analog, we had a little bit of leeway of that red. You know, when you start hitting that red, it's like, are you distorting in a really good way? You know, but in digital, you have to really be careful of that headroom. So the more you add on, the more you add on, the more you add on, you're just taking up more space. And then you're going to find yourself like turning stuff down as a whole anyway. So it's better to go, what don't I like about this sound, and take that out, and it carves room to put something else in. You know, it's the physics thing of two atoms can't occupy the same space at the same time. So if there's low frequencies, the super low.
Andrea, yeah, I do it all. I write my music, I make my beats. Especially up now, like in the last 2.5 years, I really been more like all by myself. But even for the last 5, 6, I've been doing majority. And Major was helping me, who trained me, who had a deal in beats. But yeah, I engineer, I produce, I mix, and I master. So like everything y'all seen in the last 1.5 years and the music I do, it's all produced by me. You know what I'm saying? One person.
Low frequency in the bass line, there's super low frequencies in the kick, there's super low frequencies in this 808 kick that you put in. They can't all exist in the same space. So you have to sort of pick which one is more important and carve out the frequency in other things. You have to make decisions, you know, in mixing. And for me, the bottom end is sort of easy because I know what I want. The problem is the mid-range, you know, because everything resides in that mid-range. So you're going to really have to make decisions on who's going to win out. So subtractive EQing gives me that ability to make space for other things. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I guess there's a lot of things that engineers can learn in school, but all the great engineers seem to have something extra in this regard. Can you speak to some of the unspoken skills that you bring into the sessions?
Yeah, number one is people skills. You know, you can go to school and they can teach you how compressors work and how EQs work and how everything in the studio works. But my very first session was with DMX. Think about that for a second.
Can you tell me about it?
Like, you have to be able to understand the person's personality in order to control the session. And I always say that, but it's not like, you know, it's not like just about like someone being wild and crazy, but it's also, I have 4 kids. And I deal with all of my children differently. Artists are just like children, right? It's like knowing the artist will tell you what to do in the studio because you're the person that has to sort of suggest to them, hey, you've tried this 5 times. Why don't you take a break? Why don't you go eat and come back? Or you have to know if the artist wants to be just left alone. Or the girl that like sings really well in church because she's in her comfort zone, but then when she sees that red light in the studio and it's studio time, she clams up. So you might suggest like, hey, you need to make everybody leave the room.
And let me explain this. I remember years ago, I used to go to like the NC State Cypher in Raleigh, and it used to be lit, right? Good morning, Kalia. And we'll go down there, and I remember every so often, me and my homeboys would be like 3, 4 deep. We'll go down and I participate in the ciphers. And then on the way out, I would meet people, and some people would be like, yeah, like, what's up? And I'd be like, come back to the studio. My homeboys used to tell me real quick, after like a year or two, they used to be like, yo, how come every time we go to the cypher, these guys sound like rap superstars? But when we bring these niggas to the studio, they lose all of their like appeal. You know what I'm saying? And that's when I learned younger, being an engineer and it's a difference between a studio rapper and a battle rapper outside, right? There's 2 different worlds, really. Now, very few can live in both worlds. Meaning that I bring a guy from the studio, we at the cypher, he's smashing everybody moving out there. He's smashing them. But when I bring him to the studio and I put records on, he doesn't have the same appeal. He or she doesn't have the same appeal that they had at the battle. You know what I'm saying? This happens. So with Guru saying the engineer job is we have to play personality games. Mind you that The artist is coming in, and the artists come to the studio, and they come in and they trying to manifest their dream. I always tell the artists that I know, my best way right now is saying, look, what you trying to get in your life, that's Pluto, right? And you can get to Pluto, but we got to figure out where you are. My best thing is with the artists I work with after a couple of records, after a record or two, is to figure out where they are in their artistic journey, or try to make a good assumption by talking to them and have a conversation, and even getting even more intelligent with it. When you in the studio with cats, before you start recording, you got to ask questions like, so what is your vision? What are you trying to do? Because if I know where you trying to go or what you trying to do, then it's easier for us to get this job done. Now, he said if you might be in there and you working for a minute and you kind of hit a blank road, he'd be like, man, go get something to eat. See, the engineer's job is to help the rapper get to where he needs to get more efficiently, because it's easy for the artist or the singer to overthink. So as engineer is the first fan, he or she is the first person in the studio with the rapper. He's the first, or she is the first fan that's going to hear the music. And so like he said, that when it comes down to artistry, artists are like kids, only in the aspect of artists don't really know what they want. They're coming to the studio and they're fishing. Now, if they came with their records written already and they already got beats, yes, but a lot of time artists is coming and they're fishing. And as Nipsey would say, don't get offended as a producer if you play 20 beats for a rapper and it's like beat number 25 that he liked. It's not that he don't like the other 24 beats. It's just that he's looking for the beat that he can vibe with, and it's the easiest for him to write the song to at the moment. You know, you got records where it's like, I need to sit down and think and write this. Is going to take me a second. And then you got them records where as soon as you hear them, you just know exactly what you want to say. When you're dealing with in the studio, when money's being exchanged, especially when they on the clock, they're looking for a record with the least resistance so that they can get up. You know what I'm saying? What up, Rich Red? They're looking for the records that they can feel real quick and get it done. Now, the engineer's job is to help you manifest your goals. So, like, I would tell somebody in the studio, they might be halfway through they verse, and I see what they trying to do. So, I always would ask myself, because I remember I would study Guru, and Guru would say, like, yo, let the artist fail. You know what I mean? Guru always said you got to let the artist fail, because if you let the artist fail, that's the only way they're going to learn. You know what I'm saying? I definitely understand it. Now, if they're on your team, my job as an engineer is a little different. My job is to not let you fail. That's me. Because since I just so happen to be a rapper first that make beats and engineer, I have I guess 1 or 2 up on all the rest of the rappers and producers that don't rap and produce and make beats, because I'm a rapper first. So I could have more of a personal conversation with a rapper than most producers or engineers can, because I understand and I know how I would want to be talked to, or I have an idea of how to go about talking to them about their art, right? And also respect is a big factor in this conversation. But I would tell them, like, listen, I know what you're trying to do. For what you're trying to do right now, you got to record it this way. Now, I would throw the idea out there. I even give them an example. If they don't want to hear it, I'm not offended. You let them keep going, but, you know, you let them fail. Me, I try not to let the artists fail, because the artists, when they leave my studio, they are a representation of me as well as far as sound. So I do my best to not let artists fail, especially the people that's close to me. But in reality, if it's business and you pull up, I'm supposed to let you come in here and drop whatever you came up with, good, bad, or difference, and let you deal with it. You know what I'm saying? But me, I chop it up and keep the attractive pieces, or even be honest with the artists around me and be like, stop it at the 8 bars and be like, y'all think it's dope. It's not that I dislike what you're doing. I just think, you see your first 8, yo, it's groovy as shit. You got to groove. You know what I'm saying? To make we dancing over here. When you got here, you kind of change the vibe. You got to stay in this area. So I'll be honest. You know what I'm saying? I'll even be so honest with artists that know me that we get into arguments. But at the end of the day, that's that argument. No, you want to help an artist, be truthful with them. You know what I'm saying?
She can feel comfortable by herself. Or I was doing a band one time, and I went and I saw the band, and the band was amazing, and then I put them in the studio, and I have everything like goboed up so that, you know, I'm getting the perfect sound. But then I noticed that they didn't sound the same as when I saw them live. And I realized that I was cutting off the line of sight by putting up gobos between like the bass player and the drummer. And even though the lead singer's like the front man, the drummer was really the leader of the band. And the bass player needs to be able to look over at the drummer just so the drummer can go, yep, you're killing it. You know, and then he feels comfortable, and he's like going like, but if he can't look over at that guy, it messes up their whole flow. So you have to sort of learn people and learn the environment, and that's the psychology of it. of that's what you learn. That's what I learned by actually going to studios and sitting in with Tony Maserati as he's working with people. And I learned more from him than I ever could have learned, you know, in a book. You know, that's the things that you bring. And then my experience of growing up in hip hop, I know the sound of what people are going for, or helping to define the sound by finding the things that were lacking from the music, you know. And to be honest with you, early hip hop sounded like crap, you know, like sonically, it wasn't that good. And I just made it a point to say, hey, I want to take this part and this part and this part and combine them and make this one style of really clear but heavy hip hop that was separated, you know, like going to watch an orchestra and I'm like, okay, these things are placed here for this reason, and the best person is first chair. Like we were just monoed out, you know, in hip hop because our tools were mono. So being able to spread things out and add that space. And then I found a lot of people were mixing left to right really well, but there was no depth in the music. And my teachers were really big on depth. Like, don't just use the reverb for like one space. How far away is the instrument from you? There needs to be some depth in the music. So adding that, I think, was a big factor too in developing my sound.
Do you keep, like, to go on that point, when you're working on depth in a song, are you trying to use like one reverb for lots of tracks, or do you use different reverbs for everything?
Different reverbs for different reasons, you know, depending on what the sound is. And
let me give you an example. When Guru say different reverbs, this for all my engineer heads this morning. My first conversation is for them to try to get them some game. When you talk about reverb, for example, I use reverb mainly for me, I would use reverb as a masker of noise in one way. I'll also use reverb on a singer if I want her to feel like she's in the hallway for a certain effect. But the problem is you don't want this reverb too strong. See, and when he says sweeping, let's speak on this for all engineers. Sweeping is when you take something and turn it like all the way up and then bring it all the way down. You're going from each extremity of it, right? So when we sweeping, right, we would sweep and reverb. Let's say I got a vocal of a singer and it sound good, but I want it to sound like she's in a hallway or on the mountain or something to give it more of an iconic feel. I'm going to turn it all the way up to where it's the ashy sound of the reverb, and I'm going to draw back slowly. And I'll do it a couple times. And you just have to listen. Now, reverb will also take vocals that's not as clear as much, and as you move it back, clear these vocals up. There's many ways to use a reverb. So that's why he said many.
Where I feel like it should be placed.
Antonio, what up,
I'm
bro?
not this is my way of working.
My bro in Spain.
I've seen engineers that literally don't touch their outboard gear or have plug-in presets saved, things that they've designed saved, and that's their sound. Or, you know, the guys will rearrange tracks to make sure that this thing is going into this and there's a change. I don't do that because no two songs are the same. Or when people are like, well, what was your EQ setting on that? And I'm like, why would you ever want, like, you would need the exact same vocal recorded at the exact same level. It means nothing. Like, I listen. I'm not a numbers guy, right? I can work in SSL blindfolded. So I'm really listening to what's going on instead of me concentrating on numbers.
That's what I meant when I told y'all that when you go to school for music, you learn with your eyes. You're supposed to be studying. It's the ear study. Music is the study of the ears, right? But they teach you with your eyes. So that's the first problem. And film is a study of the eyes, but they teaching you with your ears. So when he's saying, like, I personally don't follow any mathematical format when it comes down to mixing. I'm following my ears. So through the years, the truth is when you start engineering, I didn't realize it 8 years ago, but you're training your ears. So you're constantly training your ears to sound. And through time, it was like 6 years later, I took a break for like 8 months. I came back, but just how I heard everything was a little different. And I remember thinking like, damn, I can hear it. Then through like by year 8, it was like I could be sleep upstairs in the room. And like I heard a noise when the lights was off and I came downstairs and I could hear a cricket on the back porch. You know what I'm saying? So the ears are very, very important. So this is what Guru means when he's saying like, yo, for other people, they've made it to where they try to find a mathematical number for things, right? But in reality, you have to use your ears. Even if somebody give you a good number for compression on vocals, you still got to kind of wing it a little bit for what your mic and what sound you can pick up out of your equipment.
I'm listening because I come from that thing of when there was no computer screen there, you know. So
I think this is probably the same with EQ and compression. A lot of people look for a preset for compression, but it totally depends on what's incoming to it.
Yeah, and then you adjust depending on, you know, that's why you should know the compressor, right? And if you, my teachers again were good on theory versus application. Like if you know what the thing is and how to work that and what the difference is and what the difference is between VCAs and optos and the advantages and disadvantages of that, then you know how to apply it to whatever sound to get whatever you want. And you'd be surprised at people that come to me like, oh, your kicks are so hard and how did you do that? And I'm like, do you understand attack? You know, do you understand threshold? It's not that difficult. You know, it's just making choices. But people have this thing of where they're like trying to repeat something, and I never try to do that. Every time I start fresh. And then sometimes it doesn't. Some of my best mixes may have one or two things inserted on it, and it just really sounded good, and I just needed to EQ it on the board, you know?
Let me explain that for my young artists and my engineers. When I'm in the studio working, let's say I'm talking about I'm recording myself, because I record myself as well. Let's say I'm recording myself. I might get there, and let's say I drop this first verse or this hook, for example. It's two things you got to recognize. You could write a hook and a verse, and you could think you really might not like it, but you go on when you drop it, it just sounds amazing. That's something that we have to grow to. And then some things that you can write that you feel is it, but when you drop it, you can hear, you be like, I don't know, I really don't. You know, you gotta test it first. So while I could drop my hook and I could kind of be iffy about it, but once I sit back down at the chair and I press play and I listen, sometimes those hooks that I'm not confident about come off as like, yo, these sound better than the ones, it sound way better than I thought it would. So what people would think like I did a whole bunch of mixing on this vocal, no, I had strong good takes, because the better artist you are, the better you are at compressing your own air and the better you are at tone matching, right? But some of my best shit only had like, my verses had like one EQ on it. Right? So that's what he's saying. There's no real format. Like I could work on a song today and I had to put 2 compressors up there in a de-esser and it sounded amazing. But later tonight I can work on another record and that same compressor and de-esser sounds horrible. And I might have to take everything off except for one of my EQs and it sounds amazing. So you're constantly, every record is different and you can preset things. I'm the preset king. But I understand that I preset for work time. Like my presets help me take something that should take us 3 hours, take an hour. Or something that take 5 hours, take an hour and a half. That's what my presets do for me. They get me in range already so that when it's time for me to master and mix, I'm already in a good place. I can just adjust. But if I struggle and mine doesn't work for a certain voice, I just break everything down and start from scratch when it comes down to the sound.
That sort of thing. And then trying to mimic that sound when I went all the way into the box, you know, and I work in both ways. I would love to mix everything, you know, spread out on my SSL, but it's like, it's 2015. Everybody doesn't have budgets for that anymore, or the studio may not be available, so you better learn how to mix in the box.
And when you're doing these mixes, do you have an idea at the time what's going to be a hit or what's not going to be a hit? Sort of,
kind of, but you can never really tell. People's taste are fickle, you know, or I don't know, the record could, like, okay, when we were making New York, right, Jay-Z's record, New York, I knew it was a good record, but then I'm sort of questioning, is it the right record at the given time? Which sounds stupid now because it's a hit record, but I'm like, okay, we're making a record called New York. Are people in California going to really, really play this record and like be in the club going New York in California? You know, I was thinking about things like that, which is sort of my job too, is like perspective. Like, are we doing the right thing at the right time? And there's 3 things that make it key. It has to be the right music for the right artist at the right time.
I agree. So me becoming an engineer, me rapping, being a rapper first, so I say from like taking it serious from 18 to 25, I was more oriented to thinking in a certain way. as I became a beat maker and an engineer and got better at it, I started realizing like, okay, if I look at this as professionally, I got this idea for this record. It's hard. Let's use the example saying, let's say I got a record that I'm like, yo, I know this shit a hit in China. Do I have the means to put this record in China and market it so that it can hit its best attributes? If not, it's gonna hurt your range. So it'll make you question not your writing, but can I get it to the right people? So then you start looking at your records differently. You know what I mean? And even like if you gotta shoot a music video, like if I gotta do a million things to make this manifestation come to life, I overdid this. Or it's just gonna stay on the album. It's a good artistic track. This is what you gotta think about.
If you take away one of those things, it's not gonna be it could be the right music, but for the wrong artist. And it could be the right music for the right artist, but the wrong time. And all those things have to be there. So I have an idea. I trust myself as to what I like, but then I also have been able to learn this skill where I know my personal taste, and I study what the audience likes and where they are, which is why I have to stay on ground level and stay connected to people. It's also why my DJing helps so much, because I have this thing where my friends are now, in their 40s, and they're so disconnected from what 18-year-olds like, or a 21-year-old. And I feel blessed that I can go DJ parties and be connected to sort of the youth and understand where they are.
And just like a lot of rappers, we got a mentality that we think when we growing up that we can make anything hot and that we could do whatever. See, it comes with a certain level of intellectual capability for you to be a good rapper, especially on to be successful at this music shit as an independent artist, especially, because that means that at some point you're gonna have to figure it out. That, I'll give you an example. Wrong time. Let me start there. Wrong time. I dropped Declaration of My Forefathers. That's what the stuff that I've been showing y'all in the last couple months. It's time now. But I dropped Declaration 2.5 years ago, and it was the wrong time. Be honest. So now what I'm doing with all of the history and everything, if I would have did the history first or waited till the world was ready for the information, and then I dropped Declaration of My Forefathers, it would have made more sense. The right music, the wrong time. People hit me like, bro, I love the album and the historical content, I just don't know if it's the right time. So I learned from that era is like, it's not a bad album. Good thing is that it's already out and it always be out, meaning that it could go back towards, but it would have did better at the right time in the world. Like if I'm gonna drop a song like a song called Cop Shootings, it would be best to drop it now, not dropping it 3-4 years ago. You know what I'm saying? So you can have a record you wrote 3 years ago, and then it just so happens something in the world happens just like the song you wrote. That's the time to drop it if you got it in your catalog, right? And second example of something else, like he said, with your friends. At some point about 7 years ago, I started riding with all my friends. Like I didn't like Gucci. I'm keeping it 100. I didn't like a lot of music. But I said one day, I was like, you know what? Instead of me sitting here worrying about what I don't like, when I ride with my friends or any of my homegirls that I know, I'm just going to listen to what they listen to. And then I'm going to use that to base what beats I pick. So I went through a phase of thinking I'd be in the studio like, yo, I know like 3 of my homeboys are like this, or my homegirl, she'll love this. So then I would write records to that. And then I noticed that a lot of those did connect with the people I thought it would. And it did. It was like, it's a lot of phases. Major told me like years ago, like, yo, let me do your whole album. I know you a hip hop artist because I'm really like a rapper's rapper, like really. And so he was like, yo, let me do your album, which is opposite of what you used to, and you bring your feel to it. It'll help you. Now, everybody out there usually didn't really care for my CD, loved that CD. And people who usually love my CD, they didn't dislike it all the way, but it wasn't their favorite. You know what I'm saying? So it's just showing you the ranges. In reality, I had to get smarter, using myself as an example, listening to people. If I got friends, Rick might come over, and I might be in the middle of a record or just finished it, and Rick will come over like, bro, you got one. My brother say something. People on live, I'm playing records, and they be like, this is it right here. I pay attention. And then I'll judge the records I pick to put videos to from y'all, whether if y'all realize it or not. And that came from me being able to gauge the environment. And the first example was me and my homeboy Nappy Nuke was on live 3 years ago. And we both rap and sang a little bit. Nuke a better singer than me, than he is a rapper, but he dope. And I'm a better rapper than I am a singer, right? So I was live and this dude just came up there and was like, no disrespect, yo, tell your man, let your man sing all the hooks and you write all the raps. And we looked at each other like, all right. And my views went up after that. But it was the fact that we was able to listen to some random person come on our live. The people will tell you what's wrong if you're willing to listen. You just got to be able to say, are they haters or are they telling me the truth? Hey, bro, I like your CD, but man, the sound bad. Fix it.
Differences and be able to make music that appeals to everyone.
Mm-hmm. So with a lot of you said that there's a lot of people involved, often people come in with their crews and everything like this. And do you have a specific role in mind when you're going into one of these projects, or do you have to take different roles at different projects?
Yeah, different roles in different projects, but I do, over the years, it's become a thing where the studio environment, again, we did the thing which was so smart. I have this theory, not even a theory, it's proven that the best music comes from a small group of people localized in one place, right? If you look at the immense amount of music that Motown put out, and then you go to Detroit and look and stand in front of this little house, like you could fit that house in this auditorium. It's not, you know how small that place is? Or if you look at like Stax Records, or it's 20 people, I'm talking about secretaries and everything, right? It's a small amount of people. What we did was we were, to me, wasting money by bouncing around New York City to all these different studios. So, you know, the geniuses that Jay, Dame, and Biggs were, they were like, okay, let's just build a studio or buy a studio. And we focused everything at Baseline, and that just allowed my work to just go so much faster. One, because I knew the room. So, you know, having the ability to be in ground level on the design and tuning of a room, you know, I have to give a lot of respect to Dave Malapo from Pro Audio Design. He designed that room, but I give him a lot of credit for sitting in there with me, and I'm giving a whole bunch of suggestions on how to tune the room. So it's like my room to a certain degree. And then the guy who owned it, he was just like, Guru, I know nothing about the studio business. I'm just here because I'm Jay-Z's friend and I'm running a business. You run this thing. You let me know whatever you need. If you need toilet paper, if you need, you know, a wire, what, you just let me know. But you run. He gave me free reign to sort of organize everything. And that was a great thing. So it was just like, people at a certain point respected that was my space. So whatever I'm asking guys to do, they would do. And then once you have a certain amount of success, they really trust you. So it went from us like only doing 1 or 2 records a day to us kicking out like 5 or 6 records a day on tape.
See, you got to remember too, your job as the artist, especially when you coming up and you want to be an owner, is you got to understand you got to cut your costs. So building you a studio in the 90s and building your studio today is 2 completely different things. They built their studios. They had to get the rooms, the floors lifted, the sound treatment, the acoustics. They didn't have these things like the chaotic eyeballs that can basically isolate your mic to as if it isolates your mic in a soundproof room to as if you was in a soundproof room. You know what I'm saying? And it really helps you. Understanding that you buying a studio today is for your benefit. It helps you because, yes, it's going to take you some years and you need to be a student and be able to sit down and get people to help you. But you need to know that you cut your costs. You just cut 10,000, 20, 50, 100,000 out your budget of recording. So that's one budget. Then you got the budget of recording. You got the budget of videos. You got the budget of artwork. You got the budget of marketing, right? And there's more budget, but those are like your main budgets. If you can cut out majority of the budgets, then you can spend all your money on one area. But the problem is you'll learn, like I learned, that some areas you can cut them out, but you need people. You know what I'm saying? So you could be a cinematographer, but you gonna have to, that means you just gonna become the person that shoot videos for others. You really can't shoot a video for yourself. So it's one of those situations where you can gain the skill set, but it just helps you as the artist to be able to, you know, plan your videos and learn how to write them out and shit like that and to be able to get them together, you know?
And then once Pro Tools came, it was like, okay, great, we can do like 15 records in a day. You know, like digital recording was just like the thing that kicked us all the way into just like go mode. Because you have to remember, I'm balancing 10 acts at any given time that are all really good and really are making, you know, an impact on the culture. So it was a huge balancing act, but people respected my space.
Do you ever have problems with them getting not enough of your time or things like that?
Yeah. People, that, and then we had in-house producers. So imagine Kanye and Just Blaze coming in and trying to produce, and like every artist is over their shoulder, like, can I have that beat? I'm like, you guys got to give them space to work. Sometimes people don't feel like they're getting enough attention, but again, it's like children. You have to space it out and show everybody that they are loved, sort of thing.
Have you ever not been able to solve this situation with an artist?
Yeah, there's been plenty of times where someone's vision and my vision just don't match, and it takes them sort of failing to come back and then go, okay, Guru, you were right. Because I have a vision that may be broader than the vision that you had, because I've been through the experience a million times. Like, it was funny to me when we first got Drake in the studio to work on Blueprint 3. And I was having a conversation with him in 40, and I was like, I'm about to tell you guys your whole next 10 years. I know exactly what you're going to go through, and here's how you deal with it, and here's the problems that you're going to see, and all of that. I've seen it a million times, so I can kind of tell you what's going to happen, and then being able to adapt to what's going on now. So I'm like, okay, here's the challenges that we never had to face that you guys are going to have to face. We had an easy way of getting above all the noise, right? We didn't have all this noise going on when we were producing records at that time period. So that's like the only thing now that artists have to face in terms of how much music they have to put out. Because now, at least in the hip hop world, if you go 2 months without putting out something, you're forgotten. The people forget about you, and it's sort of like a new frontier of having to constantly remind people of certain things. Or you have major artists like Drake, who to me right now is like the top of the game, putting out free mixtapes just so that he can remain hot, or Future, this guy had an album that didn't really do too well, and then had to put out 3 mixtapes before he puts out his next album. So it's again, analyzing where we are and just adjusting and figuring out how to best direct artists.
See, I tell people all the time, Guru is saying that the reason why he can tell people because he has faced these situations in the business or in the music so many times. So he can clearly be able to tell. So it's many times, and it doesn't make it's not a wrong situation. It's kind of like, I tell, like, for example, I told a couple people last night, like, they were ladies, I said, yo, when y'all do your thing, make sure y'all spit, that the bars is hard, but at the same time, make sure y'all be bad, like, beautiful in the video. And I understand the response I get, you know what I'm saying? It was like, it's the same, but in reality, it applies to me too. Just like me and my homeboy Bars, it applies to us. Like, yo, we got these records, but really, we have so many girl records in our catalog that nobody sees. Everybody's pushing us. So, like, I was looking at him and saying, same thing for us. We men, so we can do this, but at the end of the day, it's the records that we do for the women, our gentle side, the romance, those records that's going to make us better. So it's that. See, as artists, we got a vision of ourselves. May not be who we are, but it's the vision we want. And then in time, if we can catch it ourselves, or other people mold us to be the artists who we need to be, just like the music. You can make the music you love, but you also got to have a mind of what do people love from you. People will tell you got 14 songs, they tell you they like these 4. Now, you might have 50 people that tell you they like different records, but there are common records. Those common records amongst multiple people, those type of feels, not the same record, but those type of feels and that type of energy and that way you went about is what they want from you. And you need to learn how to make that. You know what I'm saying?
I want to rewind to a couple of things you just said there, because it's really interesting that you're talking about 2 things, which are music coming in a community and also failure to make you move forward, which are both things that came from Dennis and Robert's talk yesterday, yeah. I think. So can you talk about some of your failures that you've had that helped you to grow?
Failures. No, I've had plenty of them, but I've also had a lot of training in terms of where I come from, and that's the thing. When you have the training, you are used to any situation. I started off as a DJ and understanding the DJ world first, and my whole perspective comes from DJing. So when things are not technically perfect, I know how to adapt to that. So,
crossfade out of it. Basically.
Yeah, or give an example. When I got here the day before yesterday, I go to do a club and I show up and the crossfader on the mixer didn't work and one of the turntables didn't work, right? You still got to do the party. You know, I've done parties on people's grandmothers, like washer and dryer. It just comes from the training, you know? My failures, I think, are when you don't choose the right thing. I think if one of the biggest mistakes that I made was I kind of pushed Jay to do a double album for Blueprint 2, which in hindsight was a mistake, right? Because Blueprint was this incredibly received album. It's like instant classic. It's standed the test of time. So it's like it's become a classic in the hip hop world. So you're coming off of that high, right? Then I'm looking at him and he's just knocking out songs and knocking out songs, and I'm like, hey, Tupac and Biggie are the only people that have double albums. Like, we should do a double album, you know, because he's at like 17 songs now. But the rest of the songs became like filler songs. We were doing songs just to make enough songs to do a double album, which I think was a mistake. If you would have took Blueprint 2 and cut that down to 12, it would have been another classic album. But I was pushing and pushing and pushing because I'm looking at Jay on the level of Tupac and Biggie, and like, we gotta equal or do better than what they did. You know, that was sort of a mistake. Or I don't know. I can't think of any just off the top of my head, but I'm not scared to make those mistakes. I'm not scared to let people tell me they don't like a record, you know? And I also get the corporate side of putting out records, which I love the fact that we don't have to deal with that anymore, you know, now with the internet. But I totally understand corporate. I don't fight that. To me, that's part of the game. That's part of what it is required to do this. So I never fight that when you feel this huge pressure. You know, there's one thing to be on a label and people are like, oh, you can put your album out. There's another thing when the artist that you're working with is the dominant force and is going to be, you know, when they tell you like this one album can pay for 10 failures, they're looking at your album to be that album that pays for the 10 failures. So there's a lot of pressure on time, and things have to come out at this particular time, you know, and that's where you start to see people rushing and not doing like the best job that they can do, or, you know, when you haven't put your best foot forward, sort of thing. But I'm not afraid to fail, you know, and that's the biggest thing. Don't be afraid of it.
And how much would you say that you throw away in a session like that? Like you're talking about, maybe you wouldn't have thrown away everything, but in a double album.
Oh, I do way more deleting than I do saving. Way more deleting. Mm-hmm. You know, I don't think people understand how much I critique records and throw away stuff, and that's not good enough. You know, I'm a huge critic. I'm a huge critic of everyone's music, including my own. So I delete a lot of stuff, or just say it's not good enough and we can do better, you know? And that's, I think, self-critique is one of the biggest things. Or if I'm making music, whether or not that's production or engineering-wise, if I'm producing, and I rarely try to produce by myself, and even if it's not collaborating with other artists, I just want people in the room. You won't have to ask people if the music is good. If you're making really good music in front of people, they'll be like, yo, this is incredible. You know, like they're just gonna start telling you that. So you can feel when people really, really love what you're doing, or at least I can. And if it's not good, I'm not married to it. Turn it off.
Does this ever get tense with these?
I give you an example of what he's trying to say. Steve Jobs, before he died, he made a point. After he was at Nike and he did a lecture. And he said when he was leaving Nike, the guy that designed most of the shoes ran up to him, and they was like 20 of them walking down the hallway. He was like, Steve Jobs, like, you like my icon. You got any advice for me? Because I'm a big fan of Apple about my products. And Steve Jobs said at first it's 20 of us. So I was like, I ain't going to tell him what I really feel because I don't want to make him feel no way. You know, I like the guy. He said I took like 3 steps, but I knew if I wasn't honest with him, me being who I am, that it wouldn't help. He said, so I turned around and I said, hey, man, I like Nike. He said, you see all these shoes on the wall right here? It was like 100 shoes on the wall. He was like, you know, Nike make a lot of great sneakers, but y'all make a lot of bullshit too. How about when y'all making this, you only bring out the sneakers that are great and sell to the public, and all the other bullshit, keep them in the background and never bring them out to the front. It'll help your worth.
These artists that if you're deleting a lot of their work, or?
No. Again, the artists trust me. If you look at someone like Freeway, who was an artist on Rockefeller, he's so creative that he would try anything. And in his trying of anything, there's going to be some stuff that you don't like. So I would easily and honestly tell him, perfect example, we were in Miami, we were at Circle House, a beautiful studio, And he's creating this song, and he's singing, and this is a rapper now, and he's like, my piano, something. Like he had heard a song, and he's trying to recreate that. And I just call him out of the booth. I'm like, Free, what are you doing? That sucks. No, it's really good, Goo, it's really good. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna put this on a CD, and we're gonna walk out by the pool, and we're gonna play this for everyone. And we played it, and everyone started laughing at him. And I'm like, don't ever question me again when I'm trying to tell you that it's not good enough. You know, like, you have to show them sometimes.
But see, that's one part of the game that's missing today. See, Guru is a true passionate individual about this. He's fully immersed in the arts, and that's what's more important to him is getting the best out of it. So today, if I was to take some of the artists I know and I walking by the pool with 100 people and I play that record, even though the response is crazy and it's like I embarrassed them, right? The lesson might not get taught with the people today because of how sensitive everybody has gotten, right? But in reality, in that situation, Guru being somebody in that label where it's a respect factor. You have to respect the engineers. A lot of people that got a lot of super talented people around them, but I won't say that they don't respect their opinion. It's just that they see their opinion as the only thing to be seen. And it's not like, that's all of us, right? We all have to learn to allow that and for the true growth. But knowing when to take it and when not to is the key, because it is sometimes when you're going to have to be that way, or you're going to have to be that way with certain people. You just got to kind of figure out what. Now, in that situation, that's the failure, meaning let them hit the wall. So I would tell people in the session, okay, I'm going to do it this way. I'm telling you, but I got you. You know what I'm saying? I'm going to do it, and after we finish, I want you to take this record home, and I want you to play this for your peoples. When you come back, and when I see you again, let me know what they said, or call me in the morning. And 95% of the time, people came back and was like, hey, bro, you was right. When I got it, my people said exactly what you said. But it might have caused an argument in the studio the night before. I could either be like, yo, man, fuck with you, ain't listening to me, or I could be like, all right, no doubt. So you get what I'm saying to you. Now you know that I'm not trying to hurt you, that I'm just being 100% honest with you. And now we can make music. And for example, I know a lot of people that's super talented, but I probably can't work with them. Like, I mean, I could work, as far as me being a rapper in the studio with you, I could work with you. But as far as like in the background or the engineer, I can't work with you. Because I know I might be sitting here thinking like, yo, this guy or this girl, if they take a couple pointers, they will be out this world. You know what I'm saying? But it's like the more talented, the more stubborn, the less open-minded to things. You know what I'm saying? But then I can get these kids that I meet that really don't know much about music, but they listen and they're willing to try to understand and take critique. And in 2 months, you know, me and this guy or these girls are making better music than these people that I know are 10 times more talented than them. But that's how crazy it is.
But if you have the relationship with the guy, he knows you're not doing it to make fun of him. I'm trying to make the best you. So if you trust me that I'm trying to make the best you, then you'll know that whatever we put out, at least in my opinion, is going to be our best foot forward. And then they'll never question you ever again.
In a lot of the music you work with, you might have a band, you might have samples. Can you tell me some of the particular tips you use on working with samples, for instance?
Yeah, with samples, if it's just a sample by itself, I sort of developed this way of doing multi-band compression before multi-band compression existed. Just because you're dealing with like sort of 2-track programs, right? Someone's sampling this off of a vinyl record back then, even before CDs were out, or cassette tapes or something. It ends up being some 2-track program that we're sampling. And the sample itself is already a mixed thing. So I would take that, mult it on the SSL. So I'd end up making probably 8 tracks out of those 2 tracks. It's all the exact same thing. And then this first 2, I would filter everything, and that would become just the bass frequencies. And the next 2 is the lower mids. And the next 2 is the upper mids. And the next 2 are the highs. And then I'd blend that all together, compress, EQ, however I wanted to do to control the frequencies. And then all of that would be bussed back to another 2 tracks. So I've sort of controlled something without having separated tracks. It's a way of me sort of controlling frequency-wise what's really in what I'm doing. Because some of this stuff is really screamy, it's coming off of vinyl, it's really crackly, you know, depending on what the program itself is.
I'll give you an example. I'm gonna keep it 100. I'm not even gonna lie. Okay, so let's say I'm using Fruity Loops, right? I recognize, because I spent my last decade in Fruity, 1 minute in Fruity, next minute in Pro Tools. 1 minute in Fruity or whatever beat program you use, 1 minute in Pro Tools. And as I got better at mixing my songs, I came up with an idea. See, it's more about what you think. So I called Major one night. I said, y'all got 2 ideas, bro. Let me ask you a question. So you know how I'm recording, right? And let's say I'm using 12 tracks, but my computer start acting up and I keep getting these signs and I'm running out of space. So I said, Mage, you think it's possible that if let's say I record my hook and use all these dynamics, but don't, and I know it's gonna start messing up when I record my verse. What if I record my hook and I take the master off completely and I bounce the song and then I bring it back in as but make sure that the levels, you make sure everything, the levels is right, and you could always go back, but making sure your levels are right. And then I bounce the song and I bring it back in to a brand new session and say, yo, do you think that now that I could drop my verses, because now my verses all in one thing, the beat and the verses all connected in one. So instead of it recognizing it as 13 sounds, as long as I did a good job of leveling and mixing, I could bring it back in as one. And now I got all of the space in the world to make my vocals great. I don't have to worry about my hook having all of these plugins and my verse. Now I could just focus on my verse. That was one idea. 2, I had another idea thinking when I was mixing, I'm constantly mixing vocals and I'm constantly compressing vocals, right? And so I had an idea probably last year this time, and I was like, what if I could press every instrument I use to make my beat? Because your voice is an instrument, right? So I started compressing everything. Every sound I use, any sample I use, I compressed it. And what I realized what it did for me was it created an open circle or square in the middle of my tracks. No matter how big my dynamics were damn near, when I put my vocals on them, it was empty in the middle. Now I'm giving y'all 100% game. Ain't nobody really trying to talk about this. But this is what Guru talk about in all sense of compression. You know what I'm saying?
I'd figure out a way to balance all of that so I can then put other things around it. But what is a great thing is that hip hoppers, we started out with just sampling, and then it forced people to learn music. And then you're learning scales and you're learning what key is that. No one in early hip hop cared about the key of the song. You know, like you hear a lot of wrong stuff, you know, but then people, as they gravitate towards music and the more you give them, the more they learn, then now we're concerned about everything being in key and adding more instruments to it. So I sort of take the live instruments and blend them together. I want everything to sound like they were all musicians in the same room on the same day. You know, I don't like when the sample is like really low and then the live parts are really high. That sounds stupid to me, or vice versa. You know, I like it to be a blend of everything together. That's just my sound or the way I perceive how music should be, so that the audience doesn't really know what the difference is. You know, that's just like one technique, but I've done so many different things, and thank God we're in this digital world where now I can manipulate, you know, freely all the stuff that I have. So to me, it's a really good time of being able to just be really creative with what I choose to do and having those choices. When I wanted to say, I was big on reamping things, and I would put an amp anywhere just to test the sound. I don't care, in the machine room, in the hallway, in the bathroom, in the next studio, you know, whatever, just so I could see what the sound sounds like. Now, it's so fun to just sit there and use Guitar Rig, and like I can run through all these guitar amps that fast and catch a sound. And, oh, that's what I want, and then print that. You know, I love the ease and the quickness of working in a digital realm as well. And then I found that when I first started working digitally, I did miss the tactile surface thing. So then it's like, okay, well then just get a controller that has buttons and knobs and assign that to whatever it is, and then now you're playing, you know, the same way that you would play something else. But instead of me having to have the physical thing, I could just assign this controller to something else next, and something else next, and something else next. To me, it's fun. I like technology. I love new things, and I love new challenges and learning new stuff. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like another recurring theme is spending some time on experimentation,
Yeah, we've lost some of the experimentation because of the fact that in a physical world, you're forced to touch stuff. So the problem is not being in plugins. The problem is that you're not playing with the plugin. You know, like play with it, like mess around with it, like figure out what it does, and then figure out something that it wasn't designed to do.
Yeah, like Future, the way he used auto-tune is very unique. He was one of the first to use it completely wrong, but still get something good out of it. I was messing with auto-tune 5 years ago, and I always noticed how the auto-tune we get sound different from the auto-tune that they using in the industry, at least the finished product. And I learned one day I always experiment with plugins, so that's how I know what things do, because I would really push them to the edge on records early on, and later on, like when I listen to them now, like, oh, that sounded horrible. But back then, it gave me a certain effect, but I knew what it did. You know what I'm saying? Good, bad, or indifference. So with the auto-tune, one day I was in and I was just experimenting, and I actually clicked the wrong button, and I clicked the modulation. And in modulation, there's different things that affect the way auto-tune sound. And the one I clicked just so happened to be something like, it gave it a Bootsy Collins feel. And I was like, oh, I get it. You feel me? And it's that, if you're running auto-tune, you need to be running auto-tune and finding other things to use with auto-tune that can help change the function of phonics of your sound.
Or really delve into it. It's not the tool. Like, don't blame the tool. It's you.
Me? Yeah.
It's you. No, it's all of us. You know what I mean? It's the person. So I don't fight this like analog versus digital thing. It's a stupid, retarded argument to me. You know, like an analog thing is an analog thing and a digital thing is a digital thing. And if you really get really technical for all the like I've had 5-hour conversations with engineers about this, right? But if you get really technical, you're not gonna find two 1176s that sound exactly the same. They just don't, you know what I mean? We'd have to like recap everything, you know, like we're not gonna find that. But then engineers will sit there and be like, oh, when I sent this through the analyzer of my real thing, it bumped and did it compress the thing well? Okay, then move on. You know, like, that's it. But you can't argue me like the power of having as many Fairchilds in my computer as possible when I've only really seen one time in real life, and I was scared to touch it because I'm like, I'm not spending 20 G's on that. Mm-hmm. You know, like, that's a real power to have. So to me, it's just the dumbest argument. Like, use your tool. And if you like working analog, which sometimes I do, I like, you know, some analog thing, then use it, you know. But if you like...
We're going to move on today. The name of this conversation, my computer is geeking. Hold on, y'all. It's Young Guru, Creativity and Engineership. We're going to move on this morning because that's what we started to get everybody. That's for my engineers, because I know I did a lot of information, and I talked to a couple people that, you know, I haven't given as much game on the engineering and the mixing that I had with the history, so I'm going to try to be fair for all my engineers and artists out there. You know, next I'm gonna move on to, I don't know if y'all heard about this case. I'm not sure exactly where it is, but three white men, they went fishing, 3 friends, they went fishing. They was going fishing and they met up, and then they called their father, and one of them called their father saying help, but like he was dying, and his father pulled up, seen all of them in there shot up and dead, and they've been trying to figure out what happened. Well, yesterday they arrested some people, so I want to bring this, see how y'all feel about this whole story crazy. So this is the sheriff talking about what happened, and he gonna give you details of what happened.
Square miles. Population's almost 700,000, and all of it is from mid-Polk County north. So it's sparsely populated area that's made up of cow pastures, orange groves, beautiful lakes, and a very, very low crime rate in the frost-proof area, which is one of the best kept secrets and one of the safest places to live any place in the nation. But all of that came to a crashing halt on Lake Streety Road. When we found these people, our victims, massacred, literally massacred, we thought, my goodness, what could have happened there? Well, we know now. I'm going to introduce you to the people that were responsible for that. Then I'm going to give you a timeline. So this is going to take a couple of minutes, and you pick from it what you need. Here on, this is the trigger man. This is the guy who directly did the damage. His name's Tony Wiggins. He's known as TJ. He's 26 years of age. This is Mary Whitmore. She's 27 years of age, and she is the girlfriend of Tony Wiggins. And this is Robert Wiggins. He's 21 years of age, and he's the brother, obviously, to TJ. But let me stop for a minute and give you a little history on TJ. TJ is someone who his criminal history should shock your conscience. It does mine. TJ started to be arrested when he was 12 years old. He is currently only 26 years old. TJ has 230 felony criminal charges in his arrest history.
How does he have 236 felonies in his arrest history and he's still walking around outside on the street? Somebody answer this question for me. Please, somebody write on the board. They said that TJ, the dude, when they found them 3 friends shot up and dead, they saying that this dude TJ, the trigger man, has 200 and something felonies. How is he still walking around?
I didn't stutter. He had 230 charges in his arrest
Please
history.
share this video.
15 convictions, and 2 times to state prison at only 26. There's a picture of Tony Wiggins. Here's the real Tony Wiggins. He's a thug. He's a criminal. He's pure evil in the flesh. He's wild and he's out of control. Mary has 0 criminal history. 0. Robert has 1 misdemeanor arrest. Virtually no arrest. Tony, 230 felony charges. They all are from the Lake Wells and Frostproof area, as was our victim. When we started receiving Crime Stopper tips, and we received them to the point that the call center said we had to bring in extra help. We had people call in from all over the nation about ideas and helping us investigate the crime and what they believed, and psychics.
Yeah, that was crazy, right?
But the local tips that came in that were filtered, and there were hundreds that came to us, the predominant information we got was, look at TJ Wiggins from Frostproof. It's not that they had any idea that he did it, but this guy is just mean. He's just violent. He's currently out on bond for breaking a guy's arm with a crowbar during a fight, waiting to go back to trial on other felony charges. This is a guy who they said will just walk up and punch you for no reason, or no reason to you, certainly a good reason to him. You look at the Florida statutes as it appears with criminal conduct, he's got some arrest history. Everything from burglary and theft to aggravated battery to resisting law enforcement officers to battery on law enforcement officers to battery on people that are 65 years or older, the elderly. He's just wild and hostile. And the people of Frostproof said, look at him. But let me tell you,
I know they
as
told us
I
something.
introduce you to
I don't
these
know
folks,
if they're charged right
and
now.
I start through the timeline, what occurred. When our crime scene folks and our detectives were working the original crime scene, what we noticed in the truck, in Damien's truck, and understand when I talk today, Damien was in the red pickup truck, and the white pickup truck had our other 2 victims in there, Kevin Springfield and Brandon Rollins.
Yeah, he'd be dead for sure.
Kevin was driving the white pickup truck, Brandon was riding in the white pickup truck, and Damien was driving his red pickup truck. The 3 of them decided to go to the lake to fish. What's more wholesome than 3 friends, 3 close friends, fishing together in Frostproof on a Friday night. And that's what they were doing. But first, Damien stopped at the Dollar General store. And we figured that out because we saw a Dollar General bag in the victim, Damien's truck. And there were things that he'd purchased there. So we went to Dollar General, and I want to tell you, when you look at a professional business that was totally cooperative with us, it's Dollar General. Dollar General always works well with us because, you know, they want good customers and they don't care for criminals stealing their stuff or certainly committing murders. What we saw when we pulled the videotape was Damien standing in line to check out. The person behind him in line to check out is, newsflash, TJ. The person behind TJ is Robert. And we also determined that Mary was in the store. So let's go to a timeline. At 21:56 hours, we call that 9:56 in the evening, Damien is checking out of the store with his product. He is followed out of the store by TJ, who checks out about 15 seconds later. And he's also followed by his brother and his girlfriend. At 10:06 p.m., only 10 minutes later, Brandon, who is now in the white pickup truck, frantically calls his dad and says, "Help." And I've already talked to you how Dad ran to the scene only to find the massacre at the scene. What we know is that Damien drove directly to the lake from Dollar General to meet his friends, Kevin and Brandon. What we know is that as a result of that, the murder occurred in short order, in less than 10 minutes. So we have all three of the suspects in the store with Damien and checking out 10 minutes before the frantic call for help. So our detectives now confirm that, hey, this guy Tony, or TJ, that we've received tips from is standing in line with and had a conversation with Damien in the store. We don't have the conversation because there's no audio, but from body language, it was not violent or animated. It was just a normal conversation. But our detectives on Monday found our suspects. And they were living on Sarver Avenue in a family compound of camper trailers. And this is in the woods outside of Frostproof. And they were living off the grid. No running water, no electricity. They had some generators. So understand that now we're talking about Frostproof in a rural part of the county. The shooting happened in a rural part of the county, and we literally have to walk the road, and we go down a dirt path through the woods that opens up into a compound off the grid. That's how far out in the woods this is. So our detectives immediately interview Tony Wiggins and Robert and Mary Whitmore. Robert and Mary consistently lie to protect TJ. Robert lies to us, Mary lies to us, TJ lies to us. They don't tell us the truth. The only common thread during their interviews, otherwise the stories are all over the place, from different vehicles to where they went to they didn't go any place, but they agreed on one thing. They went to McDonald's and ordered 10 double cheeseburgers and 2 McChicken sandwiches. That's the only thing. So on Monday, we executed a search warrant at the compound. TJ was found to be in possession of 2 shotguns and 2 SKS 7.62 rifles. He's a convicted felon. He can't possess firearms, so he was immediately arrested. Our forensic investigations team found 1 9mm shell casing, 1 at TJ's trailer. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement said from the very beginning, I had 2 conversations with the commissioner this weekend. He's a dear friend of mine. He said, Grady, FDLE's here to do anything you need. And I told you about them chipping in $10,000 to help. And he says, our lab's at your disposal. I called him Monday afternoon. I said, we need to compare some shell casings from the scene to a shell casing at our prime suspect's house. We plan to bring it over in the morning. He said, no, bring it over tonight and let's get started. They brought in people. That's the help. That's the teamwork. What did we determine? The shell casing at the scene, the shell casing at...
I want to remind everybody that this is the sheriff's department. And I want to remind you, when I moved in the country a couple of years ago, I realized that when you live in certain areas, you only deal with sheriffs who understand law. The way they dealt with this case and the way that cities have police. Small, like little country towns and small towns, they have sheriffs. And only where there's like a lot of black people in a small town where they have police. So I lived in Dunn, on the outskirts of Dunn, and there was only sheriffs. I never had a problem. But you see how the sheriffs handle things compared to the police station.
TJ's house were all fired from a Smith & Wesson handgun. And both the shell casing at home and at the scene were fired from the same weapon, the weapon that committed the massacre, in the hands of TJ. So on Tuesday, when we got the paperwork wrapped up with all of that investigation, we went back to the scene and we asked Robert and Mary if they would join us at the sheriff's office for a clarifying interview, and they agreed to come up to the sheriff's office to talk to us. Tony had lawyered up. Mary made some admissions. She said, I bought the ammunition. TJ was with me. Newsflash, we got video of that too. That ammunition was purchased on the 9th of July. She also gave us, once again, multiple stories about being with and confirming she was in the Dollar General that night. We've got evidence to show they were together less than 10 minutes before the murder. And then when we pressed her for the details and she realized, oh my gosh, they've got me, she lawyered up. She didn't cooperate anymore. Robert, the younger brother, we talked to him. Robert, up to this moment, or up to this event, is not a bad guy. at least in the criminal sense. One misdemeanor arrest. When Robert's in line, he hears Damien tell the clerk, "We're going fishing." Damien tells the clerk, because the clerk knows everybody, it's a small town. "Yeah, I'm going fishing with Kevin." So Robert and TJ are talking, and he says, "Yeah, Damien's going fishing with Kevin." And TJ says, "What? Kevin's going to be there?" So when they leave the store, TJ tells Robert, who's driving, "Go to the lake." Now, they had no plans to go to the lake until TJ told Robert, "Go to the lake." And they did. Damien now is at the lake, and he has met up with, during this time frame, Kevin and Brandon, who are in the white truck. And they have turned their trucks so that they're door to door talking to each other in the middle of the road. Robert drives and pulls up behind the white truck that's driven by Kevin with Brandon in the passenger side. TJ exited his truck. When he did, Brandon got out of his vehicle and shined a light back to see who was pulling up behind them. TJ rushed up to Brandon, pushed him against the truck, pulled a handgun out, and said, "Where's Kevin?" Well, Kevin's sitting in the driver's seat right there. And he looks and sees Kevin. He runs around, he being TJ, runs around between the red truck and the white truck. He points the gun at Kevin, and TJ says, "Where's my truck?" Kevin goes, "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yeah, you do. Where's my truck? You sold the engine out of my truck." Kevin said, "I don't know what you're talking about." At that moment in time, according to the information we've received, TJ hits Kevin. Damien starts to open the door of his vehicle and is screaming at TJ, "Put the gun away, put the gun away, put the gun away." TJ's out of control, screaming, "Where's my truck?" And he starts shooting Kevin and Brandon inside of the white truck. It's estimated, and this is still under investigation, he shoots him 9 to 10 times between the two of them. Then he turns on Damien and begins to shoot Damien, who's got his door open but is in his truck, several times. Then he goes back to Kevin's truck, and during his excitement, now he has dropped the magazine to his firearm and he can't find it. So he opens the truck door and Kevin falls out on the ground. And that's where Kevin's found. He finds the magazine to the handgun that he drops when he goes back, points the gun back. And then he calls Robert. Robert says he's sitting in the truck. He said, "I never got out of the truck. And when he pulled the gun, I started to get out of the truck. By that time, it was all over with." You can believe what of that you want to. Mary, TJ's girlfriend, she doesn't know anything. And this is one mean woman. She's not cooperating. She's not talking. She becomes incensed at the detectives when they try to confirm the spelling of her last name because it's not spelled in the traditional way you would think you would spell Whitmore. She's saying nothing, but she's there the entire time. And she's lying to protect him. TJ then tells Robert, come here. Help me put Damien in the truck. So Damien now, and we don't know the lineage, the details, because they're not given to us any better than what I'm about to tell you. They grab Damien. We don't know if he's already pulled out of the truck or if he's in the truck, because there's blood evidence all over the place. But they pick him up and heave him over into the back of the pickup truck with his foot sticking up over the edge of the bed. And then they leave. They go to a undisclosed location and supposedly strip down the gun, take it apart, and throw it away. They immediately go to McDonald's in Lake Wells and order 10 double cheeseburgers and 2 McChickens. While they're standing in line, they go through the drive-thru. It's very quiet. TJ simply says, "We weren't there." And that's all the conversation that they will admit to. We believe there's more than that. We found throughout the investigation that they lied for TJ, that she bought ammunition for TJ. And then later on Saturday, keep in mind this happened on Friday night, Robert takes that truck, which belongs to another relative, to a car wash because it's coated in red mud, and cleans it up. The owner of the vehicle knows that they're driving the vehicle. That young lady, who is a relative, doesn't know anything about anything. She's just throwing a fit because you said you were going to Sebring or Avon Park in my truck, and you bring it back looking like this. Robert cleans it up. We asked, did you clean the inside? Oh, no, we didn't clean the inside. Well, duh, they did. We found trace evidence of blood where TJ was sitting in the passenger side of the vehicle. That's being packaged up and taken to FDLE. So at the end of the day, we've charged TJ Wiggins appropriately with 3 counts of first-degree murder. At this point in the investigation, we have charged Robert with 3 counts of accessory and 1 count of tampering with evidence. We've charged Mary with 3 counts of accessory to the murder and 1 count of tampering. The investigation is ongoing. The folks who lost their loved ones that night are poor people. We've had a lot of people offer to give us more money for a reward. We don't need that. But if there's an inclination to help these folks bury their loved ones, I'm certain that would be appreciated, because there's nothing worse than having to bury your child, unless it's you're having to bury your child and you don't have any money.
That was deep.
It's important to understand, and I alluded to this the other day, I can give you more details today.
Good morning.
That, as I said originally, normally the normal murder is around drugs, alcohol, money, domestic events. No evidence of drugs in either of the victims' car. None. Zero. No beer cans, no meth, nothing. In the suspect's vehicle, when we see it, there's no indication of drugs at all. The only information we have is TJ is allegedly mad over some kind of truck deal that happened some period of time ago. We've not had an opportunity, the homicide team, to dig into that civil disturbance, if you will, yet, because we're busy solving a triple homicide, but that will come together later. State Attorney's Office, which is simply the very best, worked with us hand in glove during the entire investigation.
I wanted to tap in with y'all, and this is the case. You can finish watching this if you want. It's called Pure Evil in the Flesh. 2 brothers, 1 woman, arrested in Polk County in a triple homicide. I thought it was an interesting case. It's like Lori and Chad Daybell, so you'll notice I keep y'all on current events, because it's important for us to know what's going on in the world and what type of craziness is happening. Now, I do got a treat for y'all. I found another video of Hannibal on accident. A Hannibal the Moor who conquered Europe. It's a completely different one. Let's tap in.
I think Hannibal's genius really had 3 main components. First of all, he was a wonderful tactician. He knew how to handle different types of forces and maneuver them on the battlefield. Secondly, he was very good at motivating his men, even disparate forces from different countries, and getting them to endure privations and to fight very well for him. And third, he had insight into the minds of his opponents. He could think what they were trying to do, he could exploit their blunders and use them against them.
In a campaign that has become a legend, Hannibal marched his forces over the Alps and turned Italy into a battlefield. Roman armies sent against him were outmaneuvered, outfought, and cut to pieces.
Hannibal was something really quite exceptional as far as they were concerned, and I don't think they really expected to have to deal with a wizard in the way that they had to deal with Hannibal.
But in the end, the dead came back to haunt him. In revenge for Hannibal's triumphs, the Romans obliterated Carthage and went on to rule their own mighty empire.
Hannibal was the last of Rome's enemies who stood any chance of defeating them, undermining them, of fragmenting Roman power in Italy. After the defeat of Hannibal, Rome was impregnable. It swallowed up the rest of the Mediterranean basin, Spain, North Africa, Greece, Syria, Egypt, and the empire lasted for 400 years.
Hannibal's war against Rome was a personal obsession which ended only in death. 33 years after he'd taken the Romans to the brink of defeat, he killed him.
They're showing you a white man, but they're gonna show dreads, man.
Himself to avoid capture by his hated enemy. It was a story which could have ended so differently. At the start of the 3rd century BC, the political map of the Mediterranean was still in formation. In the west, the contest for domination was between Rome and Carthage on the North African coast. Of the two, Carthage, on the site which is now Tunis, was the more formidable. It had become rich by dominating the trade routes of the Mediterranean and controlled supplies of tin, silver, and gold.
In the 3rd century BC, Carthage was one of the richest, if not the richest, Mediterranean power. And there were 2 bases of Carthaginian wealth. One was the trade, the commerce. The other basis of Carthaginian wealth was the fertile land of North Africa. And in the 3rd century BC, they were exporting wheat. Some Carthaginian wheat reached Athens, for example, and olive oil, and also probably wine.
Rome, founded at roughly the same time as Carthage, around 800 BC, was the upstart city. Its power was built not on trade, but on its ruthless citizen army.
Rome was a society passionately devoted to war at all levels. Among the aristocrats, you could gain prestige only if you were a victorious general. You could get a triumph only if 5,000 of the enemy were killed in a single battle. And among the lower classes, among the peasants, somewhere between 15 and 50% of young men had to serve in the army, anything from 5 to 7 years. Everyone was concerned with killing, with defending themselves, with violence.
Carthage, by contrast, was a sea power which maintained a massive fleet to protect its trade routes around the Mediterranean. These harbours are totally man-made and hidden behind the city walls. 300,000 cubic metres of soil were dug out to make the two artificial harbours. The outer rectangular harbour housed the merchant fleet. This port protected the military harbour. The only way into the circular port was through a narrow passage which, in times of war, could be blocked with chains. These dry docks could accommodate 220 warships at one time, and they enabled the...
How y'all feeling this morning?
Carthaginians to maintain the fastest fleet in the Mediterranean. A British team of archaeologists discovered some of the foundations of this magnificent structure that is more than 2,000 years old.
I'm in one of the 30 ship sheds on the island, and the ships were drawn up from the sea in the foreground up these ramps to stand on them, and the hulls of the ships slid on the timbers here, laid at intervals down the ramp. Now this ramp is of course reconstructed, but it's based exactly on the remains that were excavated here. These timbers were found exactly where they were, just a little bit lower, as charred remains. This is a slightly unusual ramp in that it has a special extra facility of these little chambers or pits. This is in fact a careening ramp where workmen could get down once the hull of the ship was hauled up and careen the ship's hulls or scrape off the barnacles and other incrustations on the hulls.
The Carthaginian merchant class were not predisposed to war. Traditionally, they'd used their wealth to hire mercenaries. In Rome, they faced an enemy with a quite different attitude to life.
The Carthaginians were a commercial trading empire. They thought very much in terms of profit and loss. They used military forces for benefits. When the costs exceeded the benefits, they were willing to make peace. The Romans were much more a farmer people who took an all-or-nothing attitude. When they got into wars, they expected to win. They would fight on, even in adversity, and when they prevailed, as they almost always did, they would expect the opponents to be utterly subdued.
By the time Hannibal was born in 247 BC, the two nations had already been at war. Rome had won, and the Carthaginian merchant class who controlled their assembly had settled for peace. The treaty forced them to give up territories in Sicily and Corsica, and they had to watch their empire shrink further as Rome annexed Sardinia. But more significant still was that the First War had cost them control of the seas. But the Carthaginians were still a threat, and not just militarily. To Romans, they were an alien race from what we would call the Middle East, with strange gods and cruel ways of worship.
There were two very important and rather different elements in ancient religion. One of which was to adore a deity, and this was usually done by making a very precious and beautiful statue and putting it inside a beautiful and lavishly built building. And this, of course, is very familiar to us in the form of Greek and Roman temples. The other, which was particularly favoured by the Carthaginians, was to engage in a collective act of sacrifice. We must imagine there was an altar on which animals, and in some cases young human beings, might have been sacrificed. Now we know that this temple in Roman times was dedicated to Saturn, and Saturn is the equivalent of the Carthaginian god Baal, and Baal was the most important god for giving sacrifices, and it was to Baal and his consort Tanit that in Carthage the babies were sacrificed in the sanctuary there.
Legend has it that when Hannibal was a boy, he was taken by his father to the temple of one such god, Melkart, and there made to swear undying hatred of Rome. His father, Hamilcar, was from the aristocratic Barca family, soldiers who despised the merchant class for their appeasement policy. The story of that crucial moment in his life makes no mention of human sacrifice, but there is little question that it sometimes happened here.
He gonna tell you it ain't no story about them sacrificing humans, but they think it did.
In this sanctuary, archaeologists have uncovered chilling evidence of the part it played in Carthaginian life. Gravestones or steles with inscriptions that actually record the name and age of the child sacrificed and in what cause they died. Whether or not Hannibal's obsession with Rome started like that, it was reinforced by an extraordinary childhood as a boy in a soldier's world. At the age of 9, he was taken to Spain where his father's army was stationed. It would be nearly 40 years before he saw his homeland again. The First War with Rome had left Carthage with a foothold in southern Spain. Hamilcar wanted to consolidate their hold on it and lay the foundations of a new empire to make up for the lands the merchants back home had given away.
The Mediterranean really consists at that time of power blocks. There's Egypt, Syria, there's Greece, Italy, Spain, and North Africa. Each has roughly the same population, 3-6 million. And Spain was particularly powerful. It was politically fragmented, but it had a huge resource, silver mines to make money. And money was the strength with which you could pay armies. And we know the silver mines were active, curiously, because of recent research in the Greenland ice cap. Basically, you drill through the ice cap and you can get to Roman levels, and you can find lead pollution, lead and silver are mined together, and you can estimate the volume of lead-silver mining in Spain in the 3rd century. They were very busy. A lot of silver was mined. It was a huge resource that Carthage had captured.
Throughout his teenage years, Hannibal lived a soldier's life at his father's side. It was a masterclass in the skills of leading an army. The immediate task for the Carthaginian expeditionary force was to tighten their grip on the Iberian Peninsula. But no one was in any doubt as to who the eventual target was: Rome. In 229, when Hannibal was just 18, his charismatic father, Hamilcar, was killed in battle against Iberian tribesmen. On his death, command of the army passed to his son-in-law, Hasdrubal. Hasdrubal could see the military genius of his young kinsman and put Hannibal in charge of the cavalry, vital experience for the years ahead. 8 years later, Hannibal took another step closer when Hasdrubal paid the penalty for punishing one of his subordinates by torture. In that sword thrust, Hannibal's moment had come. His government at home may have had their doubts, but his soldiers had none. The veterans who proclaimed Hannibal commander-in-chief saw him as the reincarnation of his father. He was just 26 years old.
Hannibal is rather like Alexander the Great. He has the advantage of having a warrior father who takes him on campaigns from an early age, so he gets this experience, and when he succeeds to power, he has the respect of his men because of his lineage. But also, like Alexander, that's not enough in itself, and there are plenty of Carthaginian commanders who do not do as well as Hannibal. Hannibal has the natural genius to exploit that situation and to go on to become a truly great general.
Those 16 years in Spain ended the first act of his extraordinary career. Ahead lay his life's obsession, taking the war to Rome. Unlike Athens or Rome, Carthage has left few traces. What has been excavated 2,000 years later offers just a few glimpses of its greatness. But at the time Hannibal began his campaign, Carthage was probably the richest city in the Mediterranean, more beautiful.
You see in the other documentary, they showed you that these black people, but this whole documentary, you see the supremacy that's involved. Just keep in mind that it's us.
And Rome as refined as Athens. And although it's Rome that is now famed for its engineering, in those days Carthage was streets ahead.
We're in this planned city block up on the Bessa Hill at Carthage, and this is of interest because it dates pretty much from the time of Hannibal towards the end of his life, and it's a neatly planned rectilinear block designed for buildings in multiple occupation. Small traders and artisans and people who weren't the richest people but had some wealth. I think we must imagine this building as being at least 2 stories high, if not 3 stories high. Appian says, that one of the writers about Carthage, says that there were buildings as much as 6 stories high in Carthage. Beneath the floor of the room and beneath the floor of the courtyard where I am is the water storage facility. And this is one of the most sophisticated features of these buildings. Here is the wellhead from which you could come down and draw out water with your bucket.
The Carthaginian water storage system would not have been possible without waterproof cement, which, until recently, was always regarded as a Roman invention.
The other feature, where in many ways Carthage was at least the equal, if not ahead of the Romans at this stage, is in the waterproof mortar which lines the side of the cistern. This one is about 7 meters deep, I think, and about 4 meters long, which means its capacity would be about 30 cubic meters.
This sophisticated water collection system used in everyday life was the most highly developed in the world. Rome at that time was a city at the head of a confederacy of southern and central Italian provinces. It was growing fast, but was still a long way from being the imperial power it later became. The north had only recently been conquered, and the Gauls who lived there were still troublesome, rebellious. Back in Spain, Hannibal knew the Romans were the growing power in the region, but he didn't believe they were invincible. Biding his time, he decided to test his command in the west, far away from Rome's sphere of influence. Hannibal took his army up to the river Tagus. Facing him was a much larger force of Iberians. Legends report that crossing secretly at night, he took the enemy by surprise and had victory in his pocket by lunchtime with few losses. Much of the damage was done by Hannibal's elephants, which charged and trampled the Iberian infantry. Elephants were the Carthaginian special weapon, normally docile creatures. All these were specially trained for war. On the day of a battle, they were fed a diet of figs. This provoked a skin allergy similar to human eczema, which made them bad-tempered and hostile. They were also given alcohol, which encouraged them to charge into enemy ranks.
Hannibal wins his first battlefield victory by using the terrain, sheltering behind a river against this massive Spanish tribesmen, and also using combined arms, his elephants and his cavalry, to discomfort the enemy infantry. Both of these, the use of terrain and the use of different forces, are foretastes of what is to come later against the Romans.
News of Hannibal's victory travelled back to Rome. In response, they strengthened an existing treaty with the city of Saguntum. Unimpressed, Hannibal laid siege to Saguntum, knowing that the Romans were too busy quelling a rebellion among the Gauls in northern Italy to come to help. After 8 months, the city fell. The inhabitants were raped and murdered, their possessions looted. The protection of Rome had counted for nothing.
Saguntum is important in several ways. It's a key city which Hannibal must take if he's not to have an enemy behind him were to move against Italy. It gives Hannibal a taste of the problems of conducting a siege, even against a relatively minor city.
It was too much for the Romans. They sent ambassadors to the Carthaginian assembly and demanded that Hannibal be handed over to them to face Roman justice. The merchant leaders of Carthage were not looking for trouble. This was a demand too far. They said no, and the two rivals were once again at war. Hannibal was about to spring his first surprise. Instead of waiting for a Roman army to attack him, either in Spain or Africa, he was going to attack Italy direct. His object was to carry the war to Rome itself and destroy them before they could destroy Carthage.
The Romans were overconfident. They believed that they simply needed to invade Spain and Africa, win a victory, and the war would be won. They had control of the sea since the First Punic War. They'd seized it from Carthage. That was the normal way to move such long distances. Therefore, the idea that Hannibal would take a large army through unconquered tribal territory over 2 great ranges of mountains to attack them in their home base of Italy must have seemed unthinkable.
But thinking the unthinkable was Hannibal's trademark. His genius was to see that Italy was Rome's most vulnerable spot. Not only was their coalition of Italian towns still loose, but in the north, the Gauls who lived south of the Alps had only recently been conquered and were ripe for revolt. He set about planning a campaign which has gone down in the textbooks of military history.
Hannibal takes exactly the actions that we would expect of a modern general to prepare for his expedition. He gathers intelligence, he attempts to make allies along the route, and he also takes care to safeguard his own territories in Spain and Africa by leaving his subordinates and troops sufficient to defend them.
In great secrecy, Hannibal conferred with envoys from Gallic tribes in France. If he could get them to join him, he wouldn't have to fight his way to the Alps. He also met with Gauls from the Po Valley in northern Italy, whom he hoped would rebel against Rome and join his army. His eventual plan was to get the whole Italian coalition to defect to his side.
Only in that very year, 218, the Romans had established 2 new colonies on the Po, and he wanted to know what sort of a welcome he would have if and when he arrived. And it was when his agent sent to northern Italy returned to his capital at Cartagena in Spain with a favourable report that he finally decided to move off in June.
And so Hannibal left Spain with about 90,000 troops and a strike force of 34 elephants. The first stage of his march was through northern Spain and over the Pyrenees. It wasn't long before he ran into trouble.
A marching army such as that of Hannibal's is an immensely voracious entity. It's like a moving town. As it goes through territories, especially backward territories, it will eat up all the food, take all the fodder, all the firewood, and leave the inhabitants destitute. It's not surprising, therefore, that many of them try to fight to resist the passage of Hannibal's forces.
Quite by chance, the Romans might have intercepted him as he made his way towards what is now Marseille. But as usual, his intelligence was better than theirs and he escaped.
Roman dispositions at the beginning of the war show quite conclusively that they had no idea that Hannibal was going to invade Italy over the Alps. They sent one army to Spain and one army to Sicily with the idea of invading Africa. Indeed, it wasn't until the army destined for Spain came to anchor near the mouth of the Rhone that they heard that Hannibal was on his way. And the first news they had was Hannibal was crossing the Pyrenees, whereas in fact, of course, Hannibal was crossing the Rhone a few hundred miles north of where they were.
But he paid a price for eluding them. The elephants were terrified of the fast-flowing Rhone, which is between 200 and 500 meters wide at that point. We do not know how many elephants were lost in the river, but Polybius tells us that many elephant drivers drowned when the animals fell off the rafts. Over 5 months had passed since he left Spain, and it was autumn when he began to climb into the mountains. By then it was freezing, particularly at night. His soldiers, most of them brought up in Spain and Africa, suffered terribly. On top of that, they came under attack from local tribesmen. Most of the elephants died during that crossing of the Alps. Animal experts believe that the hard climb would have given the elephants blisters, demoralizing them to such an extent that they would have refused to move any further. In the freezing elements, their blood temperature would drop and they would have died of hypothermia.
I think it's amazing even now to think how an army could have crossed the Alps. And Hannibal didn't just take the easy way along the coast road. He went 300 kilometers from the Marseille coast up to Grenoble and through the Alps in late autumn with his army, with his elephants. He had some allies, but he also had hostile tribes to go through. And suddenly to arrive in North Italy near Turin. Wow, the Romans must have been just amazed. I don't think they had any idea that this would happen.
But Hannibal's army was in poor shape. Tens of thousands of men and thousands of horses had died on the journey to Italy. He now commanded about 20,000 half-starved soldiers, 6,000 cavalrymen on bony horses, and a few elephants.
Hannibal's short-term objective after arriving in Italy is to recover from the arduous march, to enable his men to gain local allies, and to beat the Romans to show that he's able to win victories even in their backyard. In the longer term, he aims to build on that, to continue to win victories, to have more and more Roman allies coming over to him, to the point where the Roman Confederacy disintegrates, the balance of power within Italy is shifted, and he hopes that Rome itself will then be coerced into coming to terms.
To the south, the Romans and the allies were mustering an army. They had an estimated 750,000 men to choose from, outnumbering the invader 30 to 1. But Hannibal's forces were growing as the rebellious Gauls flocked to his side, 5,000 cavalry and 10,000 on foot. The historians who told Hannibal's story saw it from the Roman point of view. He is crafty, deceitful, and cruel. But even they acknowledge his extraordinary genius for motivating men. Livy tells the story of how he converted this exhausted crew of mercenaries, regulars, new recruits, and hangers-on into a fighting force. With so many languages under his command, plain words were useless. Instead, he set up some unmistakable theatre. Livy describes how prisoners of war taken in the Alps were given an option: fight for freedom or be slaves for life. Those who chose to fight were matched in single combat. The winner would be given weapons, armor, a horse, and freedom to go their way. The losers would have freedom of a different sort in death. message to his army was clear. Hannibal was telling his army that if they fought and triumphed, the riches of Rome would be theirs. If they died in battle, they would be spared further ignominy. But if they did nothing, only the misery of slavery awaited them. Back in Rome, they were preparing to smash this upstart invader. Each year, the people elected 2 consuls with equal powers. Their office gave them the right to raise and lead an army. It was a chance to make their name immortal.
Every Roman general needs a victory. And if you win, it's the glory for you and for your family forever. And if you lose, well, that's tough.
One of that year's consuls was Tiberius Sempronius, an inexperienced commander. Hannibal prepared for battle near the Trebia River, while Sempronius was rushing north with an army of 40,000 men. His younger brother Mago was put in charge of 2,000 men and told to hide in an overgrown riverbed. The plan was for them to spring out when the battle was on and take the Romans from behind. For that to work, the Romans had to be drawn into the fight exactly where Hannibal wanted. He ordered his troops to breakfast early. The light cavalry was sent to harass the Romans on the other side of the river and then feign defeat. Hannibal was banking on the Romans chasing them as they retreated, and the plan worked. By the time the Romans had crossed the icy Alpine River and formed up on the other side, they were already at a disadvantage. Hannibal's well-fed and rested force marched forward, infantry in the middle, with elephants and cavalry on each flank.
At Trebia, Hannibal uses the freezing river to put the Romans in most serious difficulty. He managed to manipulate the consuls and the Roman army so that they crossed the river just after dawn. The men were so cold that they could hardly hold their weapons. And then they had to face Hannibal's troops, who were warm and well prepared.
The knockout blow was delivered by Mago. At the crucial moment, his troops charged out. The Roman legions were surrounded and their fate sealed. Hannibal's few remaining elephants caused chaos in Roman cavalry ranks. The smell of the elephants made the Roman horses panic and bolt. In fact, the Battle of Trebia was the last time elephants played any significant role in Hannibal's Italian campaign. But the little they did was enough to enhance the message that went back to Rome. 20,000 Romans died that cold winter's day.
Hannibal wins the Battle of the Trebia by a combination of tactics which are characteristic of his generalship. He makes sure that the Romans are fighting on an empty stomach. He has ambushers who come out behind the Romans at the critical moment, and he uses his cavalry and his elephants to encircle the Roman army and all but annihilate it. The effect of this on the Romans is that they are shocked, of course, to see that their main army has been defeated, but they have plenty more forces, and it does not initially dent their resolve to confront Hannibal and beat him the next time.
But they should have learned their lesson. There was an enemy at their gate that had come to do serious business. And just how serious would soon become clear. Hannibal had signalled his arrival in terms the Romans should have understood, but they still underestimated him. As the Romans saw it, they were sending a well-trained and committed citizen army against a motley crew of foreigners.
One of the greatest measures of Hannibal's generalship is that he wins his victories not with an army that's followed him for many, many years, that's composed exclusively of veteran troops, but one that's made up of many different nationalities, many of whom have been with him for only a short time, who don't speak the same language, and he welds them very quickly into a partnership that can achieve victories against the much more cohesive, better equipped Roman forces.
The key to Hannibal's success was his cavalry, consisting of two main units, the Heavy Brigade and the Light Brigade.
What's up, bro?
The Heavy Brigade comprised of Spaniards and Gauls riding powerful horses. They were armed with a short lance that could double as a javelin and a two-edged sword, suitable for both cutting and thrusting. The Numidian horsemen from North Africa formed the Light Brigade. This elite corps was the best cavalry of their age. They had very light and basic weapons consisting of a few javelins, a dagger, and a short sword. The sword was terrifyingly effective in the hands of these horsemen. When the Numidian cavalry attacked fleeing infantry, they would often slash the hamstrings of the unfortunate enemy, immobilizing them and taking them out of the battle. The helpless men were left to die a slow, agonizing death, or were finished off later. The Romans feared these men, known as the slingers. They hurled stones and lead bullets at their enemies with deadly accuracy. They would open fire.
These niggas had all types of military. So this is the Great Moor of Hannibal Bay. It's a documentary that is rare. They look like us.
Withdrawing to join the light infantry before the major engagement took place. The main body of the infantry was drawn from North Africa, Libya, Spain and Gaul. The Africans were heavily armed in the Greek fashion with large shields, breastplates, helmets, greaves, cutting swords for close work and long spears for the first encounter. The Spanish troops used a short double-edged sword, equally useful for cut and thrust. Some of the men also carried a curved saber. The Libyan light infantry were famed for their sobriety and a remarkable resistance to fatigue and privation. They carried the bare minimum of weapons, a few javelins, a dagger, and a small shield called a cetera. The Gauls were fierce fighters. Hannibal used them as shock troops for the front line for his infantry, and they suffered the heaviest casualties. Many of Hannibal's men now trained with Roman swords. At Trebia, Hannibal had seen how good they were for hand-to-hand fighting. He wasted no time in collecting them up and issuing them to his infantry. Such was the army that Hannibal led across the Apennine Mountains in the spring of 217 BC. There were two possible routes through the mountains. The Roman consuls for that year, Flaminius and Geminus, each took an army to meet him. Their plan was to maneuver Hannibal into a position where both the armies could engage him at once. Flaminius allowed Hannibal through the pass, then set off in pursuit, hoping to drive him towards Geminus's army. But Hannibal could see the trap and was determined to keep the two armies apart. To force Flaminius's hand, Hannibal set about pillaging the fertile Chianti region. As soon as Hannibal saw Lake Trasimene, he knew it was the perfect location for an ambush. 2,000 years ago, the water level was higher than it is today. This path, called by locals Mal Paso, Bad Step, was almost at the water's edge. Malpaso was the only way through a small valley surrounded by steep hills on one side and the lake on the other. Hannibal positioned his troops in the woods around the small valley. He then ordered a party of his men to make camp on the furthest hill and as night fell to light as many fires as they could. The trap was sprung. As soon as the Romans saw the fires in the distance, they assumed that Hannibal's army was trying to escape.
In the case of Trasimene, this was an area which, as Livy says, was naturally made for ambushes. The trick here was that no general really expects to be ambushed when he's in command of something like 25,000 men, as Flaminius was. Indeed, he probably thought, if anything, that Hannibal was walking into a trap rather than himself. It was an ambush on a gigantic scale, and one finds it difficult to think of a parallel in military history for one on such a scale.
At dawn, Flaminius set off in hot pursuit of the lights he'd seen the night before. 20,000 men and 5,000 horses marched 2 by 2 down the narrow path into the valley.
What happens at the Trasimene is a classic ambush. Flaminius, with a sizable army, is pursuing Hannibal, who he thinks is fleeing. Flaminius is hurrying along the shore of the lake to catch up and force a battle and hopefully win. Unfortunately for him, Hannibal has hidden his men very cleverly along the lake shore, using the terrain.
Incredibly, Hannibal's army of 35,000 men waited silently as 25,000 Romans filed past just meters away. Among them were Gauls whose families had been massacred 2 years before by an army under Flaminius's command. They were itching for revenge. The Carthaginian cavalry sealed the trap by blocking the end of the path. When Hannibal was ready, he gave the order to attack. The Roman army had no time to get into battle formation. Most men were slaughtered before they knew what was happening. Livy, in his History of Rome, tells how a Gaul named Icarius recognized the armor of the commander who had lain waste his homeland. He made his way through the battle and killed Consul Flaminius with his lance.
She was real back then.
Neither his corpse nor armor was ever found. News of the ambush reached Geminus too late. He sent 4,000 men to help, but they were cut off and destroyed. The remnants of Flaminius's army were driven back by Africans, Spaniards, and Gauls to the shores of the lake. Unable to retreat any further, they were massacred in the water or drowned under the weight of their armor. More than 16,000 Roman soldiers died at Trasimene.
Hannibal's great achievement at Trasimene is the scale of the ambush which he pulls off. Ambushes are common in warfare between forces of a few dozen men. What Hannibal does is to conceal an army of several tens of thousands on a hillside and to enforce such discipline that they do not give their presence away by noise, by a premature attack, despite the nerves they must have felt. It's a great tribute to his own eye for ground and to the discipline which he can encourage in such an army.
The other thing Hannibal wanted to encourage was the disintegration of Rome's federation of Italian cities. Because it wasn't happening as fast as he expected, he gave orders that prisoners of war should be treated leniently, as long as they weren't Rome.
We are told that he released his Italian and Latin allies, telling them to go home and tell their fellow countrymen that he had not come to Italy to fight them, he'd come to fight Rome on their behalf. And this suggests that the linchpin of his strategy was to try to win over Rome's allies to his side, in effect to fight Rome with her own strength.
Archaeology has revealed what may be another interesting insight into this strategy. Trasimene is on Etruscan land. There are signs that after the battle, the Carthaginians went to great lengths to make the site safe for local people. In the 1950s, a series of ditches cut into the landscape were discovered. This one has been restored to its original condition. Archaeologists believe these ovens were part of a system that Hannibal devised for burning the thousands of corpses, which would have caused epidemics if left to rot.
These are some of the cremation ovens. They're of a truncated cone or ovoid shape, 5 or 6 meters deep, with a diameter of 4 or 5 meters. According to the archaeologist Susini, they were used for burning the bodies of soldiers who'd fallen in battle. The Carthaginians used a simple method. They would lay tree trunks and branches across the top and put the corpses over them. Then fires would be lit in the pits underneath. The heat and the flames would consume the bodies, and then the ash would collapse into the bottom. Then the whole process was repeated again and again.
For Rome itself, there was no comfort. News of so many deaths and yet another defeat caused utter chaos. The population fell into a state of abject depression. Livy says that when the stragglers returned, mothers and wives dropped dead on the spot at the sight of their kinsmen whom they'd given up for dead. They did not know there was worse to come. Hannibal's main problem by now was feeding his army. There were farms to raid and crops to steal, but despite his victories, Rome's allies were not all defecting to his side. And he now faced an unexpected development. An enemy that was scorching its own earth. It was the strategy of Quintus Fabius Maximus, who was now in charge of the Roman war effort. His plan was to fight a guerrilla war, harrying Hannibal without engaging him in a large battle. By burning the countryside and leaving no crops for Hannibal to steal, Fabius wanted to starve the Carthaginians into giving up. The strategy worked, but for the Romans, it was success of the wrong kind.
Roman honor and glory depended upon fighting, upon winning battles. Fabius' tactic of delaying, of destroying land so that Hannibal didn't have food to live off, of holding back, shadowing him rather than fighting him, must have appeared extraordinary, strange, as though suddenly we were to say, no, we won't enter this World Cup, our team will be better in 4 years' time. It would be unheard of. We must go and fight. And so it wasn't just the aristocrats in Rome. It was that everyone must have carped and sneered and said, you're a coward, you must fight. That's the Roman tradition.
So they nicknamed Fabius the Delayer and let Hannibal off the hook.
The Romans are their own worst enemies. They are very uncomfortable with this Fabian strategy of delay, especially because it means their own farmlands being ruined by Hannibal while they stand back and do nothing. Therefore, after a few months, new consuls come into power who decide that the best way to tackle Hannibal is through traditional Roman means, amassing a vast army in an open field and crushing him.
Early in the summer of 216 BC, the food situation was...
When we see Pleiadian ships, we see a sphere of light, because it's the Merkaba moving...
getting desperate for the Carthaginians. Hannibal's solution was to come here, to a Roman army grain store at Cannae in the far south of Italy. Hannibal captured this fortified town, restocked his supplies, and prepared to meet his enemy face to face on the open battlefield. On learning that the Carthaginians had captured the Cannae supply depot, the newly elected Roman consuls led two massive armies to annihilate Hannibal once and for all. Their force consisted of 86,000 men. Hannibal had 50,000. But the Romans still didn't understand what they were up against.
The Roman army was still fighting in a very archaic way, relying on the strength of the group, while Hannibal, who came from a very different background, had Alexander the Great as his role model. Hannibal fought using a combined force of cavalry and infantry, with one force supporting the other. These tactics were totally incomprehensible to the Romans.
The Romans were confident that in the open battlefield they would prevail by sheer weight of numbers, but once again Hannibal used the terrain to help him. He set up his camp with his back towards the wind known today as the Lebecchio, so that the Romans would receive its dust-laden gusts full in the face. He then put his master plan into action.
Perhaps the most amazing part of Hannibal's achievement at Cannae is that his encirclement occurs not with a larger army than the Romans had, but with an army only about half their size.
It's a battle that has gone down in the annals of military history, still studied by budding generals today. Cannae was Hannibal's masterpiece. As the two armies lined up, the Roman plan was simple: to use their superior infantry numbers to punch through the much weaker Carthaginian line. But Hannibal had cleverly placed a screen of slingers and javelin throwers in front of his infantry, and they won the first blood of the day when the Roman consul Aemilius Paulus was severely wounded by a missile hurled from a slinger. The skirmishing had another function: to obscure the layout of Hannibal's forces from the Romans. He put his tough Gallic foot soldiers in the centre to take the brunt of the attack, but held his crack African infantry slightly further back on each flank. Near the hills were his Numidian cavalry, up against a more or less equal force of Roman light cavalry. Near the river were his heavy cavalry of Spaniards and Gauls. They outnumbered the Roman heavy cavalry 3-1. Hannibal's plan was to draw the Roman attack towards the shallow crescent of Gauls at the centre of his line, so as the armies closed, the African infantry on each flank held back slightly. It worked. The brunt of the Roman advance was taken by the Gauls in the centre, just where Hannibal wanted it. Over near the hills, it was stalemate. The light cavalry squadrons were evenly matched. But down by the river, the Roman cavalry was in desperate straits. It was a bitter fight, but the numbers opposing them were simply too great. They were pushed back along the riverbank, and finally they turned and were routed. At this point came the most convincing evidence of Hannibal's uncanny ability to exert iron discipline in the heat of battle. Rather than pursuing the fleeing Roman cavalry, the Carthaginian cavalry turned across the battlefield towards the other flank. In the main infantry battle, the Romans in the centre appeared to be winning. Hannibal's crescent formation flattened out as more and more Romans were drawn towards the weak spot in his front line. But on the flank nearest the hills, the Roman light cavalry saw the Carthaginian heavy cavalry coming across towards them. Fearing that they would be trapped, they turned and fled. The Numidians followed them to make sure there was no rally. But Hannibal's plan was working. As more and more Romans drove towards where they thought the breakthrough would come, the field cleared in front of the Carthaginian heavy infantry on the flanks. Suddenly, the Romans were being encircled. They found themselves being assailed from 3 sides at once, bunched together with no room to swing their swords. Not only that, but Hannibal's heavy cavalry now turned and attacked the rear of the Roman infantry. The Romans were now being attacked from all sides. They were still numerically stronger, but they were caught in a vice, and the battle became a massacre.
Are you over 25? Have a clean driving record? No DUIs?
So we got to realize why Europe hated us so much.
55,000 Romans were slaughtered, with men dying faster than in the Battle of the Somme. The ancient historian Polybius describes in graphic detail the fate of the Roman army.
As the outer ranks continued to fall, the rest were gradually huddled in and surrounded. They finally all were killed where they stood. While this murderous combat was going on, the Numidians, following up the fleeing cavalry, killed most of them and unseated the rest. Polybius, The Histories.
On that day, around 60,000 Romans perished. Both consuls died, as did all the officers. And so it was. An entire generation fell on the battlefield at Cannae.
This small memorial is all that commemorates one of the greatest battles of all time. No general has killed as many of the enemy in one day as Hannibal did at Cannae. 55,000 Romans were slain and 19,000 were taken prisoner. Hannibal lost 5,700, 4,000 of whom were Gauls. This could have been one of the great turning points in history. The flower of the Roman army lay dead. Hannibal's cavalry commander Mahabel pleaded with him to give the order to take Rome, but Hannibal said no, believing his soldiers needed time to recoup their strength. Mahabel was disgusted. According to Livy, he said to his leader, "You know how to win a fight, Hannibal, but you do not know how to use your victory." And with some irony, he exclaimed that it was proof that the gods were wise. They gave you many gifts, not all.
One of the greatest questions of the Second Punic War is what would have happened had Hannibal marched on Rome straight after Cannae to exploit the victory. It's rather like saying, what if the Germans had invaded Britain straight after their unexpected triumph over France in 1940? As in that case, it's primarily a psychological rather than a physical question. Psychologically, it might have encouraged the Romans to make peace. Physically, there were tremendous obstacles. They still had forces within Rome, they still had very strong walls around Rome, and Hannibal's army would have taken a long time to get there, a week, 2 weeks perhaps. By that time, the Romans would have been able to organize resistance, and Hannibal's forces were never very good at taking fortified cities.
There are other possible answers to the riddle of why he held his army back. Perhaps he did not want to destroy Rome at all, just to make it sign a new peace treaty between them. Maybe he expected the confederation of Italian towns at last to defect, now that he had defeated the Romans so conclusively. But the simplest is that he knew his limitations.
It must have been enormously tempting after Hannibal had won the battle at Cannae. He was victorious. But he had only 26,000, 30,000 men. And how could he possibly march against a city like Rome? 150,000 people, fortified, all the citizens were defended. There was no way in which he could possibly take a town as large as that.
The siege may have been unproductive, but Hannibal had other plans. According to Livy, he ordered his troops to take all the rings they found in the fingers of dead Romans and put them in a sack. The sack was given to Mago, Hannibal's youngest brother. "Deliver them to the Carthaginian Senate," said Hannibal, "with a message from me." In the autumn of 216 BC, Mago marched into the Carthaginian Senate. He proclaimed to the jubilant crowd, "Hannibal has just destroyed the Roman army. Send us reinforcements and Hannibal will finish Rome for good." To prove his point, he poured the thousands of signet rings that had been hacked from the fingers of dead Roman soldiers onto the Senate floor. The Senate dithered and prevaricated, and it was a delay that defined the history of Europe. By the time any supplies arrived, they were too late. Rome's worst moment of crisis had passed, and those cautious leaders had unknowingly sounded their own death knell. Before long, the Romans would wipe Carthage off the face of the land. Their revenge was so absolute that scarcely a trace of their civilization remained.
That's crazy. He sent back the rings to his people, all of the soldiers he killed, and said, basically giving them the wealth, saying, "Send me reinforcements." But the politicians took so long to send them the help, all his troops got murdered. You know what I'm saying? That show you how people fucked up, even back then.
Just one building
the politicians.
Outside the city is all that's left to give a sense of what the world has lost.
This is the only building in North Africa which has stood from Hannibal's time to the present day. And this is the tomb of a local chieftain, a guy called Ataban. He was alive almost exactly at the same time as Hannibal. So this is a monument that Hannibal himself would have been very familiar with. It's very interesting as a piece of architecture because it shows exactly the mix of cultures that the Phoenicians, the Carthaginians, took in their architecture. It looks quite Greek. I mean, at once one can see the fluted columns on the second story of it.
So that means that the Carthaginians were the Phoenicians.
Columns there, lifted directly from Greece. And the whole masonry of it, the rather finely cut stone blocks, and particularly the alternation between the very tall courses of stones and the rather squat, thin ones, this is Greek. But then there are also other elements here which are Egyptian. And in particular, on the ground floor here, there are these capitals in the corner which have a little volute, and just above, instead of a normal cornice, there's a hollowed out cornice, which is very much a feature of Egyptian architecture, as found on Egyptian temples. And at the very top of the whole thing is a lion on top of the pyramid, symbolizing the sky.
So ironically, Hannibal's victory became the beginning of the end for Carthage. He was 30 when he stood on the battlefield at Cannae and still had half his life to live. It would all be spent fighting the enemy he had sworn to hate. The time would come when he would look back on his life and realize that for all his brilliance, he had failed. After the disaster at Cannae, the Romans' first decision was to put Quintus Fabius back in command. Now everyone realized that the tactics of delay and harry were the only means to confront a tactical genius like Hannibal. It took them more than a decade, but eventually the Romans fought their way back through a long and arduous guerrilla war.
How on earth did Hannibal manage to hang on in Italy for 13 years after the Battle of Cannae? He must have been desperate, miserable, unable to fight a real battle, the Romans refusing to face up to him in a large battle in Italy, and the Romans having the sense to open a second front, to attack Spain, which was the only place from which he could be reinforced.
Hannibal must have known that his dream was ending. Even then, his power base in Spain was under threat, while Rome's among the towns of Italy was holding firm. The lack of commitment from Carthage itself was fatal. Even those who had witnessed his triumphs knew now that time was on Rome's side.
Hannibal's greatest strategic failure was that he did not encourage the scale of defections which he had hoped for among the Roman allies. I think his miscalculation was for two reasons. First, that he perhaps expected the Roman Confederation to be as weak as the Carthaginian alliances proved to be when the Romans invaded Spain and Africa. And second, that it was his only hope. That was the only strategy that offered any chance of beating the Romans.
7 years after Cannae, the Roman army in Spain took Hannibal's power base at Cartagena. In doing so, they cut off what had become the Carthaginians' main source of wealth and Hannibal's only source of reinforcements. The troops stationed in Spain did manage to escape, not back home, but across the Alps to Italy. They were commanded by Hannibal's other brother, Hasdrubal, and their plan was to meet up with Hannibal near Rome. It didn't work out. The Romans got wind of the plan and intercepted them in northern Italy. According to Polybius, Hannibal learned the outcome of that meeting in the cruelest way possible. A lone horseman galloped up to his camp south of Rome and tossed a bundle onto the ground. In it was his brother's head. Hannibal now knew that he was on his own. Worse was that he was facing an enemy which had learned from its mistakes.
Hannibal changed the way that the Romans fought their battles. Never again after Cannae were the Romans so foolish as to alternate generals' commands day by day. And in order to beat Hannibal, they had to entrust generals with power which ran on for years. And the Romans could never have conquered the Mediterranean basin if they'd gone only for annual commands. So all the great Roman generals had commands. Julius Caesar, Pompey had commands which lasted for years.
The first of those great Roman generals on which the empire was built was Scipio the Younger. Having mopped up the Carthaginians left in Spain, he turned his attention to beating the man he most admired.
Hannibal has essentially run into a stalemate in Italy. But in order for Carthage to lose the war, the Romans need to break the Carthaginian monopoly on good generalship. They do this through the advent of Scipio the Younger, Scipio Africanus as he's to become, who has learnt through bitter experience at first hand what good generalship can do to Roman armies, having been present at some of Hannibal's victories. And in Spain, and then later in Africa, he uses his own genius to do the same to the Carthaginians as Hannibal had earlier done to the Romans.
Scipio decided to ignore Hannibal's base in southern Italy and take the war to Africa. He knew this would eventually force Hannibal to abandon his long campaign and return home to defend Carthage. On the eve of the decisive battle, the two generals agreed to meet. Livy records,
"When Hannibal met Scipio, here met the greatest generals not only of their own times, but of any to be found in the records of preceding ages."
Scipio held the trump card. He'd done a deal with Hannibal's Numidian cavalry. For the right money, they'd agreed to change sides, and Scipio needed time for them to arrive from Libya. It was a coup worthy of Hannibal himself, and a mortal blow to the Carthaginians. When the two sides met in battle at Zama, not even Hannibal's genius could save him from defeat. The year was 202 BC, The Second Punic War had lasted 16 years.
Zama is the Waterloo of the Second Punic War. Hannibal loses it for two reasons. First, he faces for the first time a general as good as him. Just as Napoleon faced Wellington at Waterloo, Hannibal faces Scipio at Zama. Secondly, the quality of the armies has shifted. The Roman army is still dominant in heavy infantry, but these are very experienced troops who've been through 20 years of war, and now they have cavalry allies which give them cavalry superiority, similar to that which Hannibal had enjoyed at Cannae. And it's that cavalry superiority in the end which enables Scipio to prevail.
The Carthaginian peace party quickly settled with Rome, and for good measure exiled Hannibal from the city when he tried to challenge for political power himself during the shaky peace that followed the war.
The immediate reason for Hannibal's exile from Carthage was a combination of his involvement in politics and trying to stamp out corruption, thereby making enemies, and Roman pressure on Carthage, because of course they wanted to make sure there was no resurgence of Carthaginian power under a great leader like Hannibal.
Rome, for its part, went from strength to strength. It was Hannibal's tragedy that his long feud with Rome would end in his own city's humiliation and the greater glory of Rome.
Rome's war with Hannibal marks a watershed in the evolution of the Roman Empire. Basically, before the war with Hannibal, Rome wasn't a power in Italy. Afterwards, it had Spain, it had a subservient North Africa, double its revenues from the taxes that the defeated Carthaginians paid to Rome. And because Hannibal had tried to make an alliance with North Greece, Rome immediately had defeated Carthage, turned its attack on Greece. So this was the beginning of Rome's domination of the whole of the Mediterranean.
But even in exile, Hannibal never gave up. As Rome expanded its power into the eastern Mediterranean, he offered his services to whoever would take the Romans on. They, for their part, pursued him relentlessly.
Hannibal was still capable of generalship, and he was actually able to advise the opponents of Rome in the eastern Mediterranean long after the Second Punic War. So it's not surprising that the memories of the events of the Second Punic War would predispose them to want to put an end to this great opponent.
One place in which he fetched up was Bithynia, which was fighting a war with the Roman client state of Pergamon. Even then, in the last years of his life, he could still demonstrate the brilliant inventive mind that had terrified the Romans. The battle was to be at sea. It occurred to Hannibal that in ships where oarsmen were naked, and that even the marines had little clothing, nothing could be more fearsome than the explosion on board of bombs of poisonous snakes. So simple. When the two fleets engaged and the pots exploded onto the decks, there was panic, and the Bithynians secured the victory. Romans did not ignore warning signs like that. On hearing of Hannibal's involvement in the battle, they sent an army to capture him. Eventually, he was cornered in the Bithynian village of Labissa. Hannibal was 63. The soldiers of the enemy he'd fought all his life were taking up positions round his villa. He knew their plan was to take him prisoner and take him back to Italy as the centerpiece of a Roman triumph. It was a humiliation he could do without. His final victory over them was to deprive them of that revenge. According to Polybius, Hannibal's last words were,
Let us relieve the Roman people of their long anxiety, since they find it tedious to wait for the death of an old man.
In retrospect, of course, you can see that Hannibal failed. But my God, what a glorious failure. He took an army from Spain, marched through the south of France, went across the Alps into Italy, won 3 glorious battles, and his name survives. You know, this was a great general. Okay, he didn't conquer Rome, but he tried.
Hannibal's death wasn't the end of the matter for Rome. They may have seen Carthage's continuing ability to trade as a challenge to their supremacy, but that was no reason to destroy it. What they couldn't live with was the memory of their humiliation at Hannibal's hands. The only way to exorcise it was to obliterate it completely.
Romans are a destructive, conquering nation. They conquered the whole of the Mediterranean by violence, by killing people, by war. And the conquest of Carthage was one step on the way of making themselves the supreme power of the Mediterranean. They had nothing really to fear, but destroying towns was part of their imperial business.
35 years after Hannibal's death, the Romans laid siege to Carthage. It took them 3 years to finish the job. They entered the city, murdered 450,000 people, and then burned it to the ground. The ruins were ploughed over to express the final destruction. A curse was invoked with great solemnities upon anyone who might attempt to rebuild it.
Of all that befell the Romans and Carthaginians, good or bad, the cause was one man and one mind. Hannibal.